The soda cup tipped slowly, almost cinematically, before a full 20 ounces of cherry cola cascaded over Nia Hart's head in the pristine marble lobby of Ridgewell Innovations. She didn't scream. She didn't curse. She just stood there, designer coat dripping, while three front desk employees laughed like they'd just pulled off the prank of the century. They decided in under 60 seconds that this black woman in Chanel didn't belong in their building. What they didn't know, what would shatter their smug grins in exactly 11 minutes, was that the woman they'd just humiliated owned half of everything they could see. Before we dive into this story, if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this message travels. And if this story moves you, hit that like button. Let's make sure stories like this reach the people who need to hear them most. The morning had started with promise. Nia Hart had chosen her outfit carefully. A cream silk blouse beneath a structured charcoal coat, tailored trousers that whispered elegance with every step, and the kind of leather handbag that didn't announce its price tag because it didn't need to. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was simply existing in her truth. Successful, confident, and deeply in love with a man who'd built an empire on integrity, or so she'd believed. Ridgewell Innovations occupied 12 floors of steel and glass in downtown Portland, a monument to Graham Reese's vision of ethical tech development. Nia had been here before, of course, but always through the private executive entrance on the building's west side, whisked up to the penthouse offices without ever touching the ground floor chaos. Today was different. Graham had asked her to meet him in the main lobby at 10 o'clock sharp, something about wanting to introduce her properly to the daytime staff, to make their marriage more visible in the company culture. No more hiding you away like some secret, he'd said that morning, kissing her forehead. You're my partner in everything. They should know that. So she'd come through the front doors like any other visitor, expecting nothing more dramatic than perhaps some curious glances and polite introductions. The lobby itself was a statement piece, Italian marble floors and geometric patterns, floor-to-ceiling windows flooding the space with natural light, living walls of ferns and orchids breathing life into the corporate sterility, and a reception desk that curved like a white wave across the center of it all. Behind that desk, three young staffers managed the flow of visitors. Dylan Crow, 24, and perpetually slouched like the world bored him. Kara Voss, 26, with the kind of sharp features that seemed designed for judgment. And Marcus Chen, 23, and so far existing mostly as a silent observer of whatever dynamics his coworkers established. Nia had noticed them watching her the moment she stepped inside, not watching the way security might scan for threats, not watching the way colleagues notice someone new. They were watching the way predators track prey, with narrowed eyes and half smirks that suggested they'd already decided something about her, and were just waiting for the entertainment to begin. She crossed the lobby with measured confidence, her heels clicking against marble in a steady rhythm that announced presence without apology. The security turnstiles stood between her and the elevator bank, requiring either a badge scan or front desk approval. Standard protocol. Nothing complicated. "Good morning," Nia said as she reached the reception desk, offering the warm smile she'd perfected through years of navigating spaces that questioned her belonging. "I'm here to meet Graham Reese at 10 o'clock. Nia Hart." The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds too long. Dylan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, that smirk spreading wider. "Nia Hart," he repeated slowly, like he was tasting the words for lies. "And you have an appointment with Graham Reese, the Graham Reese, owner of this entire building." "That's correct." Nia kept her tone level, professional, giving him nothing to weaponize. Kara swiveled in her chair, joining the examination with eyes that traveled deliberately from Nia's face down to her shoes and back up again, a visual pat-down that made skin crawl. "That's interesting," she said, her voice dripping with performative confusion. "Because Graham's assistant usually calls down when he's expecting visitors, especially for 10 a.m. appointments. It's literally her job." "I spoke with Graham directly," Nia explained, feeling the first prickle of unease despite her determination to remain calm. "This morning, he asked me to meet him here." Dylan snorted. "Right, because billionaire CEOs definitely make their own appointments." He exchanged a glance with Kara, some silent communication that excluded Nia entirely and seemed to confirm whatever suspicions they were nursing. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his fingers hovering over his keyboard like he wanted to just check the system and resolve this, but neither of his colleagues was interested in resolution. "Listen," Kara said, her tone shifting into something that mimicked patience the way plastic flowers mimic real ones. All appearance, no substance. "We get a lot of people coming through here claiming they have meetings with executives, sales reps trying to skip the vendor process, ex-employees who think they can just walk back in, people who don't really understand how access works in a building like this." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Nia felt her jaw tighten, but she breathed through it. She'd been here before, not in this lobby, but in 1,000 variations of this moment. The doubt, the suspicion, the immediate assumption that her presence in certain spaces must be a mistake or a hustle. She'd learned long ago that anger, no matter how justified, would only be used against her. So she reached into her bag with deliberate calm and withdrew her phone. "I can call Graham right now if that would help clarify things," she offered. "Oh, you have his personal number?" Dylan's voice was pure mockery now. "Wow, that's dedication. Did you get it from LinkedIn? Or maybe you're one of those people who somehow finds executive contact info and just shows up?" "I'm his wife," Nia said quietly. The words should have ended it, should have triggered apologies and immediate access, and perhaps some embarrassed scrambling to make things right. Instead, Dylan's face split into the widest grin Nia had seen yet, and he actually laughed, a sharp, barking sound that brought Kara's laughter tumbling out right behind it. "His wife," Kara repeated, nearly choking on the words. "Oh my God, that's actually impressive. Like, the commitment to the bit is almost admirable." Dylan stood up, stretching lazily like this was the most entertaining thing that had happened all week. "Graham Reese is married to Victoria Ashford, as in the Victoria Ashford of Ashford Media Holdings. It's been in literally every business publication for the past 2 years. Their wedding was in the Hamptons. There were helicopters." Nia felt the ground shift beneath her feet, not physically, but in that way where reality reveals itself to be something other than what you'd believed it to be. "I don't know who Victoria Ashford is," she said carefully, "but Graham and I were married 8 months ago in a small ceremony in Ojai. Just family. Very private." "Sure you were," Kara said, her voice now openly hostile. "And I'm married to Elon Musk, but we keep it quiet because he's shy." Marcus finally spoke, his voice uncertain. "Maybe we should just call Graham's office. This is getting ridiculous," Dylan interrupted, reaching for something beneath the desk. When his hand came back up, it was holding a large cup from the coffee shop next door, one of those 44-ounce fountain drinks that nobody needs but everyone buys. Cherry cola, half finished, condensation beating on the plastic. "You know what? I'm tired of people like you coming in here with your little schemes and your attitude, thinking you can just claim to be connected to powerful men, and that'll get you whatever you want." "People like me," Nia repeated softly, needing him to say it, needing the record to be clear. "People who lie," Dylan said, but his eyes told the rest of the truth, the part he wasn't willing to speak out loud but was broadcasting nonetheless through every sneer, every dismissive glance, every assumption he'd made the moment she walked through those doors. He lifted the cup, and for one surreal moment, Nia thought he was going to take a drink. Prove he was just thirsty. Make this all some strange misunderstanding that could still be walked back from the edge. Instead, he tilted it forward, and 20 ounces of sticky cherry cola poured over her head in a cold, shocking cascade. The liquid hit her scalp first, shocking in its coldness, its violation, its sheer disbelief-inducing reality. It soaked into her carefully styled hair, ran down her face in red rivulets that she had to close her eyes against, drenched the collar of her silk blouse, and splattered across the marble floor in a spreading pool of humiliation. She could feel it dripping down her neck, seeping beneath her coat, turning her skin tacky and her clothes heavy. For 3 full seconds, Nia stood frozen, her hands slightly raised as if to catch what had already fallen. Her breath came in shallow pulls, not from fear, but from the Herculean effort of maintaining control when every instinct screamed to lash out, to match his violence with her own, to become exactly what they already believed she was, so that at least the punishment would fit the crime. But she didn't scream, didn't swing, didn't give them the satisfaction. She opened her eyes, cola stinging them, blurring her vision, and looked directly at Dylan Crow. "I need to speak to your manager," she said, her voice somehow steady despite the tremor she could feel building in her chest. "Right now." Dylan dropped the cup on the desk with a hollow plastic clatter. "My manager is going to tell you the same thing I'm telling you. You need to leave. Now. Before we call security." "Call them," Nia said. "Please. Call everyone. I would very much like witnesses to what just happened." Kara stood up, joining Dylan in what was starting to look like a coordinated attack. "What just happened is you came into a private building with some delusional story about being married to Graham Reese, got increasingly aggressive when we tried to verify your claims, and now you're refusing to leave. That's what happened. And we've got it all on camera." She pointed to the security camera mounted in the corner, the one that was indeed recording everything, though Nia suspected Kara hadn't thought through what that recording would actually show. "I wasn't aggressive," Nia said quietly. "I asked for verification. That's not aggression. That's procedure." "You raised your voice," Dylan shot back. "I didn't." "You were making the other people in the lobby uncomfortable." Kara gestured vaguely toward the few other visitors waiting in the seating area, people who were now very pointedly not looking in their direction, suddenly fascinated by their phones and magazines. "I don't think I'm the one making people uncomfortable," Nia said, feeling cola drip from her chin. Marcus had backed away from the desk entirely, looking like he desperately wanted to disappear. "Guys, maybe you should do your job and call security," Dylan told him sharply. "We've got a trespasser who's refusing to leave and making false claims about executive relationships. That's literally what the security protocol is for." Nia's hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from rage held on such a tight leash it was starting to cut off circulation. "I'm not leaving," she said. "Not until I speak to someone in authority who's capable of handling this situation like a professional." "We are the authority," Kara said, her voice rising. "This is our desk, this is our lobby, and you don't belong here." The words landed like they were meant to, not as a statement about appointments or protocols, but as a judgment about Nia herself, about her presence in this space, about her right to exist in rooms where power concentrated like oxygen at high altitudes, thin and precious, and apparently reserved for those who looked a certain way. "I need to clean up," Nia said, pivoting strategies because she was starting to realize that reason wasn't going to work here, that she was dealing with something uglier than mere incompetence. "There's a restroom just past the turnstiles. I'm going to go wash this off. You can verify my identity while I'm gone. Call Graham's office. Talk to his assistant, Clara Martinez. She knows exactly who I am." "You're not going anywhere except out that front door," Dylan said. "And you're definitely not getting past security without authorization, which you're not getting." "I'm covered in soda that one of your employees poured on me," Nia said, her voice finally starting to crack around the edges. "I'm asking for basic human decency. Let me use the restroom." Kara's face twisted into something that might have been pity on a kinder person, but here looked more like satisfaction. "Should have thought of that before you came in here with your little story. Maybe next time you'll think twice before trying to scam your way into buildings where you don't belong." "I'm not scamming anyone," Nia said, and she hated how her voice sounded now, thin, desperate, exactly like someone who was losing control of a situation that should never have spiraled this far. "I'm Graham Reese's wife. My name is Nia Hart. We were married last March at a private vineyard in Ojai. His mother wore lavender. His best man was Julian Torres, his college roommate. We honeymooned in Portugal for 2 weeks. I can tell you things about Graham that nobody outside his inner circle would know. Please, just call his office." Dylan pulled out his phone with theatrical slowness. "You know what? Fine. I'll call. But when this proves you're lying, and it will, you're going to have a lot more problems than sticky clothes." He dialed, put the phone on speaker, and they all listened to it ring 4 times before a professional female voice answered. "Graham Reese's office, Clara Martinez speaking." "Hi, Clara, it's Dylan from the front desk," he said, his voice dripping with false professionalism. "Sorry to bother you, but we've got a situation down here. There's a woman claiming to be Graham's wife, Nia Hart. She says she has an appointment with him at 10. There was a pause, long enough that Nia felt hope kindle despite everything. Then Clara's voice came back, confused but friendly. I don't see any appointment scheduled for 10 o'clock, and I don't have anyone in my records named Nia Hart. Are you sure she said Graham specifically? Maybe she's looking for one of the other executives. The hope died as quickly as it had sparked. Dylan's grin was triumphant. No, she was very specific, claimed she's his wife, said you'd verify it. Clara laughed, actually laughed. Not cruelly, but with genuine bemusement. His wife? Graham's wife is Victoria Ashford. They literally just got back from a business conference in Singapore together. Is this someone's idea of a prank? Nia felt the floor drop away. Not just the disbelief anymore. Not just the humiliation. This was something else. Something that reached into her chest and grabbed her heart with cold fingers. Graham and Victoria, Singapore. Together. Not a prank, Dylan said, eyes locked on Nia with something like victory, more like a very committed con artist. We'll handle it. Thanks, Clara. He ended the call and set the phone down gently, like a lawyer resting his case. So, still want to keep pretending? Or are you ready to leave quietly before this gets really ugly for you? Nia's mind was racing, trying to fit pieces together that refused to align. Victoria Ashford, Singapore. The assistant who should know her name, who'd helped coordinate several dinner deliveries to their home, who'd sent Nia a birthday card, that Clara didn't know who she was? Unless it wasn't the same Clara. Unless Graham had been living two completely separate lives. Unless everything she thought she knew about the man she'd married was, "I'm calling security," Kara announced, reaching for her desk phone. "This has gone on way too long." "Wait," Marcus said suddenly, his voice stronger than it had been. "This doesn't feel right. Maybe you should remember who signs your paychecks," Dylan cut him off, "and whose authority we operate under. This woman is clearly unstable. Look at her. She's standing here dripping soda, spinning stories about being married to a billionaire and refusing to leave when asked repeatedly. That's textbook concerning behavior." Yes. The narrative was shifting again. Nia could feel it happening in real time, like watching a car accident from inside the vehicle, unable to stop the momentum. She wasn't just being denied anymore. She was being rewritten, turned from victim to threat, from person seeking help to problem requiring removal. "I'm not unstable," she said, but even to her own ears the words sounded defensive, shaky. "I'm confused. I'm trying to understand what's happening." "What's happening is you need to leave," Kara said, phone already to her ear. "Yes, this is the main reception desk. We need security in the lobby immediately. We've got a woman refusing to exit the building, making false claims about executive relationships and displaying erratic behavior." Yes, that's correct. Thank you." She hung up and smiled, cold, professional, victorious. "Security will be here in 2 minutes. You can either walk out on your own right now or you can wait for them to escort you. But either way, you're leaving." Nia looked around the lobby, at the other visitors who were very carefully not meeting her eyes, at Marcus, who looked sick but silent, at the cameras recording everything, at the beautiful space Graham had created that was suddenly feeling like a trap. Cola was drying sticky on her skin, her clothes were ruined, her dignity was in tatters. And worst of all, doubt was creeping in like poison. Because what if she was crazy? What if these 8 months had been some elaborate delusion? What if... No. She knew her own life. She knew her own marriage. She knew Graham's voice when he told her he loved her, knew the weight of his hand in hers, knew the taste of his coffee when she stole sips in the morning. That was real. Whatever was happening here, whatever game or mistake or nightmare this was, her marriage was real. "I'll wait for security," Nia said quietly. "And I'll wait for Graham, because he'll be here at 10. And when he sees what's happened, when he understands how I've been treated, there will be consequences for everyone involved in this." Dylan actually laughed. "Consequences? Right, because Graham Reese is going to show up and what? Defend the honor of some random woman who walked in here pretending to be his wife? That's not how billionaires operate, sweetheart. They don't come running to rescue strangers." "I'm not a stranger," Nia said. "I'm his wife." "Keep telling yourself that," Kara muttered, turning back to her computer like the matter was already settled. The elevator chimed across the lobby, not the main elevator bank, but the private executive lift that required a special key card. The doors slid open, and Calvin Rook emerged. head of facilities management, a man in his early 50s with the kind of self-important stride that suggested he took his authority very seriously. He spotted the scene at the reception desk and headed over with the air of someone who'd been interrupted from more important tasks. "What's the situation?" he asked Dylan without even glancing at Nia. Dylan straightened, clearly pleased to be reporting to someone senior. "Trespasser claiming to be Graham Reese's wife. She refuses to leave. Got aggressive when we tried to verify her story. We've called security." Calvin finally looked at Nia, took in her cola-soaked appearance, her expensive but now ruined clothes, her exhausted posture, and something like disgust crossed his face. "You did this to yourself?" he asked, nodding toward the liquid pooling around her feet. "No," Nia said, her voice barely above a whisper because she was so tired, so overwhelmingly tired of this. "Your employee poured it on me." Calvin looked at Dylan with raised eyebrows. "She got agitated," Dylan said smoothly. "There was an accident. But the important issue is she's trespassing and making false claims about relationships with executives." "I called Graham's assistant," Kara added helpfully. Clara confirmed Graham's wife is Victoria Ashford and that they were just in Singapore together. Calvin nodded slowly, like pieces were clicking into place. "Right, the Ashford wedding. Big deal last year. I remember." He turned back to Nia, and his expression had shifted from disgust to something almost like pity, the kind that makes things worse, not better. "Ma'am, I don't know what you're going through or what brought you here today, but this isn't the way to handle it. If you're experiencing some kind of crisis, there are resources. But you can't come into private buildings making claims that aren't true." "My claims are true," Nia said, but she could hear how it sounded, desperate, exactly like someone clinging to a delusion they couldn't let go of. "Security is here," Marcus said quietly, looking toward the front entrance where two uniformed guards were approaching. The guards were professional but firm, a man and woman in Ridgewell's security uniform, both carrying the kind of calm authority that suggested they'd handled difficult situations before. The woman, whose name tag read J. Morrison, took the lead. "What's going on?" she asked Calvin. "Trespasser," Calvin said. "Refusing to leave. Making false claims, possibly experiencing a mental health crisis." Morrison turned to Nia with eyes that weren't unkind but were already categorizing, already deciding what kind of problem she represented. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with us." "I have an appointment," Nia said again, knowing how futile it sounded, but unable to stop herself. "With Graham Reese, at 10 o'clock. He's expecting me." Morrison glanced at her watch. "It's 9:58, so he should be here any minute if that's true." "Yes," Nia said, grasping at the small mercy of someone actually listening. "Yes. If you'll just wait 2 minutes. We've already verified with Graham's assistant," Calvin interrupted. "This woman has no appointment, no relationship to Graham. She's fabricating the whole thing." Morrison's expression shifted, still professional, but cooler now. "Ma'am, we can do this easy or hard. You can walk out with us voluntarily, or we can involve the police. Your choice." "Call them," Nia heard herself say. "Call the police, get everyone here, because I'm not leaving until Graham arrives, and when he does, every single person involved in this—" She gestured at Dylan, at Kara, at Calvin, at the cameras, and the witnesses, and the whole catastrophe, "is going to have to answer for it." The male guard, whose name tag read R. Chen, shifted his stance slightly, not threatening, but ready. "The more you resist, the worse this gets for you. We don't want to arrest you for trespassing, but we will if we have to." "Then you'll have to," Nia said, and she felt something crystallize inside her chest. Not quite courage, not quite resignation, but something harder and clearer than either. She was done begging, done explaining. If this was really happening, if Graham really had some secret wife and secret life, and she'd somehow built an entire marriage out of lies and delusion, then let it all burn down here in this lobby. Let the truth, whatever it was, come crashing through those glass doors and shatter everything. Morrison pulled out a radio. "Dispatch, this is Morrison at Ridgewell main lobby. We're going to need police response for a trespassing situation. Subject is refusing to leave voluntarily and making concerning claims." The radio crackled back. "Copy that. Unit is 3 minutes out." 3 minutes. Nia looked at the clock on the wall, 9:59. Graham was supposed to be here in 1 minute. 1 minute, and this would all be resolved. Or 1 minute, and her entire world would confirm itself as a lie. Dylan was on his phone, filming now, because of course he was. Because humiliation in the modern age required documentation, required an audience. "This is insane," he muttered to Kara. "She's really going to wait for the cops rather than just admit she made it all up." "Mental illness is a hell of a thing," Kara said, loud enough for Naya to hear. Marcus looked like he might be sick. "We should stop recording," he said quietly to Dylan. "This feels wrong." "This is protection," Dylan shot back. "Evidence that we handled everything correctly, that she was the problem, not us." The lobby had filled with spectators now. Other employees coming down for coffee or morning meetings, visitors who'd arrived for appointments, people drawn by the drama like moths to flame. Nia could feel their stares, could hear the whispered speculation, could imagine what they saw. A crazy woman, cola-soaked and desperate, spinning fantasies about billionaire husbands while security closed in. The clock ticked to 10 o'clock. The front doors remained closed. Graham didn't appear. Nia felt something inside her chest begin to crack. Not break entirely, not yet, but develop the first hairline fractures that suggested structural failure was imminent. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was crazy. Maybe... The elevator chimed. Not the visitor elevators. Not the private executive lift Calvin had used. The penthouse elevator. The one that required Graham's personal access code, that only rose to the top 3 floors where the C-suite lived in glass and leather and decisions that shaped markets. The doors slid open, and Graham Reese stepped into the lobby. He was on his phone, head down, finishing some conversation with the distracted air of someone who'd been multitasking through 17 things before breakfast. He was wearing the charcoal suit Nia had helped him pick out last month, the navy tie she'd given him for his birthday, the watch he never traveled without. He looked exactly like himself, handsome, powerful, walking through his building with the unconscious confidence of someone who owned not just the space but the very air inside it. He didn't see her at first, didn't see the scene at the reception desk or the security guards or the crowd that had gathered. He was just Graham, arriving for his 10 o'clock appointment with his wife, probably expecting to find her waiting comfortably in a chair, maybe reviewing something on her phone, ready to smile when she saw him. What he found instead was Nia, drenched in cherry cola, surrounded by security, being filmed by his own employees while half the lobby watched like it was street theater. His phone lowered slowly. His eyes found hers across the marble expanse, and Nia watched his face transform from distracted to confused to horrified in the space of 3 seconds. "Nia?" His voice cut across the lobby, not loud but carrying in the sudden silence that fell when people realized the billionaire had arrived. "What?" He was moving before he finished the question, crossing the lobby in long strides that scattered people from his path. Morrison stepped forward to intercept him, not recognizing him out of context, and Graham didn't even slow down. "That's my wife," he said, and the words were so simple, so absolute, that they hit like a physical force. The lobby erupted in gasps, in whispered, "Oh my gods," in the collective intake of breath that comes when a plot twist lands so perfectly that even the audience who saw it coming still feels the impact. Dylan's phone dipped. Kara's face went white. Calvin froze mid-step. Marcus closed his eyes like he was praying. Graham reached Nia, and his hands went to her shoulders, gentle, searching, cataloging the damage with eyes that had gone from warm to absolutely glacial in the time it took him to understand what had happened. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice so quiet it was almost worse than shouting. "Who put their hands on you?" Nia couldn't speak, couldn't find words that would adequately contain what the last 15 minutes had been. So she just looked at Dylan, then at the empty soda cup still sitting on the reception desk, then back at Graham. His jaw tightened. His hands dropped from her shoulders but stayed close, protective, like he was physically placing himself between her and further harm. Then he turned to face the room, and when he spoke, his voice could have cut steel. "Someone tell me exactly what happened here. Right now." The silence that followed Graham's question was the kind that pressed against eardrums, that made people acutely aware of their own breathing. Dylan's phone was still raised, still recording, but his hand had started to shake. Kara had taken an unconscious step backward, putting distance between herself and the reception desk, as if proximity to the scene of the crime might implicate her further. Calvin stood frozen in that peculiar way people do when they realize they've made a catastrophic miscalculation and are frantically trying to compute how to walk it back. Morrison, the security guard, was the first to find her voice. "Mr. Reese, we received a call from the front desk about a trespasser. We were responding to—" "A trespasser," Graham repeated, his voice dangerously soft. He hadn't moved from his position beside Naya, one hand still hovering near her shoulder, like he was afraid she might disappear if he wasn't touching her. "You're telling me that my wife—" He gestured to Nia, cola still dripping from her hair onto the marble, "was treated as a trespasser in my building?" Morrison's face shifted through several expressions before settling on professional distress. "Sir, we didn't know. We were told she was making false claims about being related to executives. The front desk staff said they'd verified with your assistant." "Then someone get my assistant down here right now," Graham cut her off. "And someone get me the security footage from the last 30 minutes. Every camera angle. I want to see exactly what happened from the moment my wife walked through those doors." Calvin cleared his throat, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. "Mr. Reese, I think there's been a significant misunderstanding. When I arrived, I was informed that this woman, that your wife, was claiming to have an appointment that wasn't in the system. The staff followed protocol for unauthorized visitors." Graham's head turned slowly toward Calvin, and Nia watched the facilities manager actually take a step back from whatever he saw in her husband's eyes. "Protocol," Graham said. "For unauthorized visitors involves pouring beverages on them? Because unless that's a new policy I somehow missed, someone here went far beyond protocol." "That was an accident," Dylan said suddenly, his voice higher than it had been, rushed and defensive. "She got agitated. I was holding my drink and—" "Put the phone down," Graham said, not even looking at him. "Right now. And if you've posted that footage anywhere, you're going to delete it. Immediately." Dylan's phone dropped to the desk with a clatter. Graham turned back to Morrison. "I want everyone who is involved in this situation to remain in the lobby. No one leaves. No one goes back to their desk. Everyone stays right here until I've reviewed the footage and decided how we're handling this." "Yes, sir," Morrison said, already pulling out a radio to relay instructions. Naya felt Graham's hand finally settle fully on her shoulder, warm and solid and real in a way that made the previous 15 minutes feel like they'd happened in some alternate dimension. "Are you hurt?" he asked her quietly, his voice shifting to something private, meant only for her ears. "Did anyone touch you? Besides the—" He gestured vaguely at the cola staining her clothes, like he couldn't quite bring himself to articulate the full extent of the disrespect. "I'm okay," Nia managed, though her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "Graham, they called your office. They talked to Clara. She said she didn't know who I was. She said your wife is Victoria Ashford and that you just got back from Singapore with her." Something complicated passed over Graham's face. Not guilt exactly, but something close to it, wrapped in frustration and what looked like dawning comprehension. "We need to talk," he said. "But first we're going to handle this. All of it. Nobody gets away with treating you like this." The elevator chimed again, and a young woman in a sharp navy dress emerged, tablet in hand, looking confused about why she'd been summoned to the lobby with such urgency. This was Claire Martinez, Graham's executive assistant, the woman who managed his calendar and his calls and the 1,000 details that kept a billionaire's life running smoothly. She spotted Graham immediately and started toward him, then noticed Nia and faltered. "Clara," Graham said, his voice still carrying that dangerous edge. "Did you receive a call from the front desk about 15 minutes ago?" Claire's confusion deepened. "Yes, Dylan called asking about an appointment at 10 o'clock for someone named Nia Hart. I told him I didn't have anything scheduled and I didn't recognize the name." "Why? What's—" She stopped as she took in the scene properly. Nia's ruined clothes, the security presence, the crowd of onlookers, the tension thick enough to cut. "Oh my God, what happened?" "What happened," Graham said slowly, "is that my wife came to meet me for an appointment I made directly with her, without going through you, and was told she was lying about who she was. Then she was assaulted, humiliated, and threatened with arrest." Clara's face went through its own journey of realization. Your wife. But I thought. She stopped herself, looked at Nia again with new eyes, and Nia watched the assistant's professional composure crumble into horror. Mr. Reese, I didn't know. When Dylan called, I just checked my calendar like always. You never told me you were married. I've been your assistant for 3 years and you never mentioned. I know, Graham said, and there was something almost like apology in those 2 words, though Nia wasn't sure if it was directed at Clara or at her. That's my fault. But right now, I need you to pull every piece of communication from this morning. Every call, every email, every message that went through the front desk or security. And I need you to get HR and legal down here. All of them. We're about to have a very serious conversation about what constitutes acceptable behavior in this company. Clara nodded, already typing on her tablet with trembling fingers. Right away. Should I clear your morning? You have the board presentation at 11, and then cancel everything, Graham said flatly. Tell the board we're rescheduling. Tell everyone I'm unavailable for the rest of the day. This takes priority over everything else. As Clara hurried back to the elevators, Graham turned to address the crowd that had gathered. Employees, visitors, people who'd come down for coffee and stayed for the drama, all of them watching with the rapt attention of people who knew they were witnessing something that would be discussed in break rooms and forwarded through Slack channels for months to come. Everyone who doesn't work in this building, please proceed with your appointments or exit as needed, he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made it clear this wasn't a request. This is an internal matter. Anyone recording or photographing needs to delete that content immediately. If I find out this situation has been shared on social media or anywhere else, there will be legal consequences. The crowd thinned slowly, reluctantly, visitors heading toward the elevators while employees lingered with poorly concealed curiosity. Nia watched them all, felt their stares like physical touches, wondered what story they were already constructing about the woman in the ruined designer clothes who'd somehow materialized a billionaire husband out of thin air. You, Graham said, pointing at Dylan. What's your full name? Dylan Crow, the receptionist said, trying for dignity and landing somewhere closer to desperate defiance. And I want to say that I was just doing my job. We get people all the time trying to. Your job, Graham interrupted, is to greet visitors professionally, verify their appointments, and facilitate access to the building. Your job is not to interrogate people, mock them, or pour beverages on them. So let's be very clear, you weren't doing your job. You were abusing the small amount of power your position gave you to humiliate someone you decided didn't belong here. Dylan's face flushed red. She couldn't verify her identity. She had no appointment in the system. What was I supposed to do? Just let anyone who walks in claiming to be related to executives get automatic access? You were supposed to call security, Morrison interjected quietly. That's the actual protocol. If you can't verify someone and they're insisting they have legitimate business, you call us. We handle it from there, professionally. I did call you, Dylan protested. Eventually. After you assaulted my wife, Graham said, and the word assaulted hung in the air like an indictment. Let's not dance around what happened. You poured a drink on another human being because she couldn't immediately prove to your satisfaction that she deserved basic respect. Kara found her voice then, stepping forward with the air of someone who'd decided the best defense was a strong offense. Mr. Reese, with all due respect, none of us knew you had a wife. You've never mentioned her. She's never been to the building through the front entrance. And your actual public profile, the one every business publication has covered extensively, says you're married to Victoria Ashford. So when someone we don't recognize comes in making claims that contradict everything we know about you, yes, we questioned it. That's not abuse. That's basic security. Graham looked at her for a long moment, and Nia could see him processing the argument, weighing it against whatever complicated truths he was carrying. What's your name? He asked finally. Kara Voss, Senior Reception Specialist. Kara Voss, Graham repeated. You're right that I've kept my personal life private. You're right that I've never introduced my wife to the front desk staff. You're right that there's information in the public sphere that contradicts what she told you this morning. But here's what you're wrong about. None of that justifies what happened here. None of that excuses treating another human being with contempt and cruelty. And none of that absolves you or Dylan of responsibility for how this situation was handled. So what were we supposed to do? Kara's voice rose, frustration and fear mixing into something sharp. Just believe everyone who makes wild claims? Just give access to anyone with a good story? That's not how security works. That's not how any of this works. You were supposed to treat her with basic human dignity while you verified her claims, Graham said. You were supposed to call my office and ask to speak to me directly if there was confusion. You were supposed to err on the side of professionalism instead of mockery. And you were absolutely supposed to allow her to use a restroom to clean up after your colleague assaulted her, which I'm told you refused to do. Kara's confidence wavered. We couldn't let her pass security without what? Without authorization from someone who actually has the authority to make those decisions? Someone like me? Graham's voice was getting colder with each exchange. You kept my wife standing in this lobby, covered in soda, while you played gatekeeper to a bathroom, while you laughed at her, while you filmed her, while you turned her humiliation into entertainment. Marcus spoke up then, his voice almost a whisper, but somehow carrying in the tense silence. I wanted to just check the system and call your office. I said we should verify before assuming, but Dylan and Kara said they already knew she was lying and that I was being naive. Dylan's head whipped toward him. You're throwing us under the bus? Really? We're a team, Marcus. We're supposed to be professionals, Marcus shot back, finding strength now that the truth was coming out. And what happened here wasn't professional. It was cruel. I watched it happen, and I didn't stop it, and I'm sorry for that. He looked at Nia when he said it, and she could see genuine remorse in his eyes. I should have done more. The elevator chimed again, and this time 4 people emerged. 2 from HR in conservative business attire, 2 from legal with briefcases, and the wary expressions of people who'd been warned they were walking into something complicated. Clara was with them, her tablet now covered in notes. Graham turned to the new arrivals. Sharon, David, thank you for coming down. He nodded to the HR representatives. Jessica, Tom, appreciate your speed. The lawyers. We have a significant incident to address. My wife, Nia Hart, was assaulted and humiliated by front desk staff this morning. I want a complete investigation, full documentation, and recommendations for disciplinary action, and I want it started right now. Sharon, the senior HR director, looked like someone had just dropped a bomb in her inbox, but was determined to handle it with professionalism. Mr. Reese, we'll absolutely investigate this thoroughly. Can you walk us through what happened? I can do better than that, Graham said. I want to watch the security footage. All of it. With everyone present. Right here. I want no confusion about what occurred and who was responsible. Tom, one of the lawyers, cleared his throat. Sir, that might not be advisable from a legal standpoint. If we're looking at potential terminations or other disciplinary action, having that occur in a public setting could expose the company to... I don't care, Graham cut him off. What happened to my wife happened in public, with an audience, with people recording it for entertainment. The response is going to be equally public. Get the footage up on that screen. He pointed to the large display mounted on the wall near the reception desk, normally used for company announcements and visitor information. Morrison was already coordinating with building security, speaking into her radio in low tones. Within 3 minutes, the display flickered to life, split into 4 camera angles showing different views of the lobby. The timestamp read 9:43 a.m., 2 minutes before Nia had walked through the front doors. Play it, Graham said. The footage rolled forward at normal speed. Nia appeared on screen at 9:45, walking through the entrance with confidence and grace, her appearance immaculate, everything about her body language speaking to someone who had every right to be there. Watching it now, from outside herself, Nia could see what she hadn't felt in the moment. She looked like she belonged. The clothes, the bearing, the calm smile as she approached the desk. There was nothing threatening about her, nothing that should have triggered what came next. On screen, Dylan spotted her immediately. The video had no audio, but his body language was clear. He nudged Kara, pointed, and they both watched Nia approach with expressions that the camera captured in unfortunate detail. Amusement, skepticism, something darker that looked like anticipation. The exchange at the desk played out silently. Nia speaking, Dylan leaning back with crossed arms, Kara swiveling to join the examination. Even without sound, the dismissiveness was obvious. Marcus looked uncomfortable even then, glancing between his colleagues and Nia like he knew something was wrong but didn't know how to stop it. Then came the moment Nia reached for her phone, and the footage captured Dylan's face, splitting into that grin, the one that had preceded the assault by maybe 15 seconds. He said something to Kara that made her laugh. He reached under the desk. He lifted the cup. "Stop it there," Graham said, his voice tight. The image froze. Dylan's hand raised, cup tilted, Nia's face still composed, but starting to show the first edge of concern as she realized what was about to happen. Graham turned to Dylan. "Before I play the next part, I want you to explain to me what you were thinking in this moment. What was going through your mind that made you believe this was acceptable?" Dylan's earlier defiance had crumbled entirely. He looked at the screen, at his own frozen image, and seemed to see himself clearly for the first time. "I thought she was scamming," he said quietly. "I thought she was some kind of con artist trying to get access or money or, I don't know. I was angry that she wouldn't just leave, that she kept insisting on this story that seemed so obviously fake." "So you decided to punish her," Graham said. "I decided to make her leave," Dylan corrected, but the correction was weak, unconvincing even to himself. "By assaulting her." Dylan's silence was answer enough. Graham nodded to Morrison. "Play the rest." The footage resumed. The cola poured in slow motion that wasn't slow motion at all. It just felt that way because everyone watching knew what was coming, and the anticipation stretched seconds into small eternities. The liquid cascaded over Nia's head, drenching her, and the camera caught her reaction with brutal clarity. The shock, the momentary freeze, the supreme effort it took not to retaliate. And it caught Dylan's face too. The satisfaction, the smirk, the way he dropped the cup like he'd just won something. Kara's laughter was silent on the footage, but obvious from her body language. Marcus turned away, couldn't watch. The few other people visible in the background reacted with varying degrees of shock and discomfort, but no one intervened. No one stepped up to help. The footage continued through the next 10 minutes. Nia asking for the restroom and being refused, Nia requesting a manager and being ignored, Nia standing there dripping while Dylan made his performative phone call to Clara's office, the security guards arriving and treating her like a criminal, Calvin appearing and immediately siding with his staff without investigating, the crowd gathering to watch and record and turn human suffering into social media content. By the time the footage reached Graham's arrival, Nia felt hollowed out. Watching it from outside herself was somehow worse than living through it. She could see her own dignity eroding in real time, could watch hope drain from her posture with each passing minute, could observe the exact moment she'd started to doubt her own reality, because the alternative was too painful to sustain. Graham hadn't moved through the entire playback. He'd watched it with the stillness of someone holding fury on such a tight leash that any motion might snap it. When the screen finally froze on his own image entering the lobby, he took a slow breath and turned to face the assembled group. "What I just watched," he said, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow filling the entire space, "is not a security incident. It's not an honest mistake. It's not an unfortunate misunderstanding. What I just watched is a group of people I employ, people who represent my company, deciding that someone they'd never met didn't deserve basic human respect, and then treating her humiliation as entertainment." Sharon from HR had been taking notes throughout the footage. Now she looked up with an expression that suggested she knew exactly how serious this was about to get. "Mr. Reese, I think we should move this conversation to a conference room. We need to conduct formal interviews with everyone involved, document everything properly, and what?" Graham asked. "Handle this quietly? Issue some disciplinary warnings? Send everyone to a training session about unconscious bias and call it resolved?" He shook his head. "No. This doesn't get buried in HR protocols and legal settlements. This gets addressed right here, right now, with the same lack of privacy my wife was afforded." Jessica, the senior legal counsel, stepped forward carefully. "Graham, I understand you're angry. You have every right to be. But we need to think about liability, about wrongful termination claims, about the optics of—" "The optics," Graham repeated. "You're worried about optics. What about the optics of my wife being assaulted in my own building by my own employees? What about the optics of a culture where people feel comfortable doing what I just watched because they've decided someone doesn't belong?" What about the optics of me knowing this happened and doing nothing meaningful to address it? He turned back to Dylan and Kara, and his face had settled into something cold and final. You're both terminated, effective immediately. You'll be escorted to collect your personal belongings under supervision, and you'll be off the property within the hour. You'll receive your final paychecks according to state law, but you'll sign NDAs about this incident, and if I find out you've spoken about my wife or my family to anyone, media, social media, your friends at a bar, I will pursue legal action to the fullest extent possible. Dylan's face went gray. You can't fire me for doing my job. I'll sue. Wrongful termination. Please do, Graham said. Please take this to court so we can play that footage for a jury and let them decide whether pouring a beverage on someone constitutes doing your job. I'll welcome that lawsuit. I'll fund the best defense team money can buy, and I'll make sure every detail of what happened here becomes part of the public record. The threat landed with the weight Graham intended. Dylan's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Kara tried a different approach, her voice edging toward tears. Mr. Reese, I have student loans. I have rent. I can't afford to lose this job, please. I made a mistake, but I didn't pour anything on her. That was Dylan. I just went along with it. I'll apologize. I'll do anything to make this right. You participated, Graham said, his voice not softening even slightly. You laughed. You refused her access to a restroom. You called her unstable and erratic when she asked for help. You were complicit in every moment of her humiliation, and complicity is still culpability. You're terminated. Sharon made a note on her tablet. I'll process the termination paperwork immediately. Security can escort them to— Not yet, Graham interrupted. He looked at Nia, and his expression shifted, still angry, but gentler now, concerned. Nia, is there anything you want to say to them before they leave? Every eye in the lobby turned to her. Nia, who had been standing slightly behind Graham throughout the footage viewing, who had watched herself be violated and mocked on a screen while the perpetrators stood 10 feet away. She could feel the weight of expectation, the terminated employees hoping for mercy, the HR team ready to document whatever came next, the remaining onlookers waiting to see what a billionaire's wife would do with power when she finally had it. I don't know you, Nia said finally, her voice steady despite the tears she could feel threatening. I've never met you before today. You didn't hate me because of anything I'd done or said. You hated me because of what you decided I was in the first 60 seconds after I walked through that door, because I didn't match whatever image you had in your mind of who belongs in spaces like this. She took a breath, made herself look at Dylan directly. When you poured that drink on me, you weren't defending the building from a threat. You were asserting power over someone you'd decided was beneath you. You were putting someone in their place. And the worst part is, you enjoyed it. I saw your face. You felt good about what you did. Dylan couldn't meet her eyes. Nia turned to Kara. And you enabled it. You could have stopped it at any point, before, during, after. You could have said, let's just verify this properly before we escalate. You could have shown basic compassion to another human being who was clearly telling the truth, who had done nothing wrong, who just wanted to use a bathroom. But instead, you chose cruelty. You chose to protect your colleague and your own ego over doing what was right. Kara's tears were falling now, but Nia felt no satisfaction in them. I don't want your apologies, Nia continued, not because I'm vindictive, but because apologies right now would just be about saving yourselves. I want you to sit with what you did. I want you to really think about the kind of person you have to be to treat someone that way. And I want you to be better. Not for me, not for this job you're losing, but because the world has enough cruelty in it already. The silence that followed was absolute. Graham squeezed her shoulder gently, a private gesture of support, then turned to Calvin. You're suspended, he said, pending a full investigation into your handling of the situation. You arrived after the initial incident, but you immediately took sides without investigating. You accepted your employee's version of events without question, and you contributed to my wife being threatened with arrest. That's a failure of judgment that calls into question your fitness for leadership. Calvin opened his mouth to protest, then seemed to think better of it. I understand, he said stiffly. I'll await HR's findings. Marcus, Graham said, and the young man nearly jumped at hearing his name. You saw what was happening. You voiced concerns, but you didn't escalate it. You didn't call my office directly. You didn't do enough to stop it. That's not a fireable offense, but it's not acceptable behavior either. You're suspended for 1 week without pay, and when you return, we'll have a serious conversation about what it means to have courage in the workplace, about speaking up even when it's uncomfortable, about being willing to be unpopular in defense of what's right. Marcus nodded, looking relieved and ashamed in equal measure. I understand, sir, and I'm sorry, to both of you. Graham turned to Morrison and Chen, the security guards. You two responded to a call and handled it professionally once you arrived. You didn't create the situation, but I want you to think about what protocols we have in place that could have prevented this. If someone calls saying they're related to an executive but the front desk claims otherwise, what's the proper chain of verification? Who gets called? How do we ensure people are treated with dignity while we figure out the truth? I want recommendations on my desk by end of week. Yes, sir, Morrison said. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry this happened in our building. Graham's attention shifted to the small crowd of remaining onlookers, employees who'd come down to watch, who'd filmed on their phones, who'd turned another person's suffering into morning entertainment. Everyone else who's still here, who watched this happen, who recorded it, who did nothing to help, you're not fired. But you should be ashamed. And if I find out footage of my wife's assault has been shared anywhere, you'll be hearing from our legal team. That's not a threat. It's a promise. This ends here. The crowd dispersed quickly then, people suddenly remembering appointments and tasks that required immediate attention elsewhere. Sharon approached with her tablet. Mr. Reese, we'll need to document everything properly. Formal statements, exit interviews, the full investigation into Calvin's actions. It's going to take most of the day. Then it takes most of the day, Graham said. But first, I'm taking my wife home. She's been through enough. He turned to Nia, and his face softened completely. The CEO mask dropping to reveal just Graham, just her husband, looking at her with such anguish that she felt her careful composure finally begin to crack. Let's get you out of here, he said quietly. Please. Nia nodded, not trusting her voice. They walked toward the private elevator, Graham's hand at the small of her back. And Nia kept her head high, even though everything in her wanted to collapse. As the elevator doors closed on the lobby, on the scene of her humiliation, on the employees being escorted out by security, on the HR team already typing up reports, she finally let herself lean into Graham's side. I need to know about Victoria Ashford, she said quietly. I need to know about Singapore. I need to know why your own assistant doesn't know I exist. Graham's jaw tightened. I know, he said, and I'll tell you everything, I promise. But first, let's just get you home. The elevator rose in silence, carrying them away from the marble and glass and cruelty, but Nia knew they were also rising toward a different kind of reckoning, one that had nothing to do with front desk staff or security protocols, and everything to do with the secrets her husband had been keeping, the life he'd been living in parallel to the one they'd built together. The penthouse office was everything the lobby wasn't. Warm wood tones, leather furniture worn soft with use, windows that overlooked the city like a promise of possibility. But right now it felt like a cage. Nia stood by those windows, still wearing her ruined clothes because she'd refused Graham's offer of something from the emergency wardrobe he kept for unexpected overnight work sessions. She wanted to feel the sticky residue of the cola on her skin, wanted the physical reminder of what had happened, because what was about to happen needed to be grounded in that reality. Graham had poured her water she hadn't touched, had offered food she'd declined. Now he sat on the edge of his desk, hands braced against the polished surface, looking at her with an expression that managed to be both anguished and resigned, like a man who'd known this conversation was inevitable and had been dreading it anyway. Victoria Ashford is real, he said, finally, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for the 5 minutes since they'd entered the office. She's the daughter of Marcus Ashford, who owns Ashford Media Holdings. 2 years ago, her father approached me about a merger. His media empire, combined with our tech platform, could have revolutionized how information flows globally, but Marcus is old school, traditional. He wanted the deal secured with a marriage alliance between our families. Nia turned from the window slowly, not sure she'd heard him correctly. A marriage alliance, like we're living in feudal Europe. Like we're living in a world where billions of dollars in global influence sometimes operate by rules that normal people would find absurd, Graham corrected quietly. I told him no, multiple times. I wasn't interested in marrying someone I barely knew for business purposes, no matter how lucrative the deal. But somehow Clara thinks you're married to her, Nia said, her voice carefully controlled. And apparently so does every business publication. So what changed? Graham's hands tightened on the desk edge. Nothing changed in terms of my actual feelings or intentions. Everything changed in terms of what people believed was happening. Marcus started planning stories in his own media outlets, carefully worded pieces about our families growing closer, about Victoria and me being seen at events together, about an engagement that was imminent but private. He was creating a narrative that would pressure me into making it real. And you let him. It wasn't a question. I tried to shut it down, Graham said, frustration bleeding into his voice. I had our PR team issue denials. I personally called editors at major publications to correct the record. But Marcus owns enough media that he could keep the story alive through strategic placement, through sources close to the families, through carefully constructed speculation that never quite crossed the line into actionable libel. Nia felt something cold settling in her chest. When did we get married, Graham? 8 months ago, March 17th, at the vineyard in Ojai with 30 people who love us. And when did the first story about you and Victoria Ashford appear? Graham's silence was answer enough, but he gave her the words anyway. 14 months ago. The first mention was in a business column about tech and media consolidation. It suggested I was romantically linked to Victoria as a way of facilitating merger discussions. So you were already publicly connected to another woman when you asked me to marry you, Nia said, and the calmness in her own voice surprised her. She'd expected rage, tears, something explosive. Instead, she felt almost detached, like she was watching this conversation happen to someone else. I was already being lied about by someone else's media machine, Graham corrected. There's a difference. I never dated Victoria, never proposed to her, never gave her or her father any indication that I was interested in that kind of arrangement, but I couldn't control what they published, and after a while I realized that trying to fight it publicly was just giving the story more oxygen. So you decided to just let people think you were married to her. I decided to stop wasting energy on correcting a false narrative and focus on building a real life with you. Graham stood up, took a step toward her, then stopped when he saw her body language close off. Nia, you have to understand, in my world there's always noise, always rumors, always people trying to connect me to deals or relationships or controversies that have nothing to do with my actual life. I learned a long time ago that you can't fight every false story. You just live your truth and let the noise be noise. Except the noise followed me into your lobby this morning, Nia said, her voice rising now as the detachment started to crack. The noise is why your own assistant told Dylan and Kara that your wife is someone else. The noise is why I stood there covered in soda while people laughed at me for claiming to be married to you, because according to the entire world, I'm not. According to tabloids and business gossip columns, Graham countered, not according to the people who matter. My mother knows about you, my closest friends know, everyone in my inner circle knows exactly who you are, and that our marriage is real, and that Victoria Ashford is nothing but a story her father manufactured. But Clara doesn't know, Nia said. Your executive assistant, who manages your schedule and your calls and probably knows more about your daily life than anyone except me. She has no idea I exist. How is that possible, Graham? How do you keep your wife a secret from the person who coordinates your entire professional life? Graham ran a hand through his hair, frustration and guilt warring across his features. Because I compartmentalized. Because I wanted to keep you separate from all the chaos and politics and bullshit that comes with running a company this size. I wanted our marriage to be this protected space that existed outside of board meetings and merger negotiations and publicity stunts. I thought I was protecting you. You were hiding me, Nia said flatly. There's a difference between protection and concealment, and what you did was concealment. You kept me away from your office, away from your staff, away from any part of your professional life where someone might wonder why the wife they'd read about in Forbes wasn't the woman standing next to you. I never went anywhere with Victoria, Graham insisted. Never attended events with her. Never gave any legitimacy to the stories Marcus was planting. I made sure that anyone who actually looked, anyone who did more than skim headlines, would see that there was no substance to the rumors. But you also never did anything to make me visible, Naya shot back. You never brought me to company events, never introduced me to your executive team, never even told your assistant to put my calls through without verification. You created this weird shadow existence where I'm your wife in private but a complete stranger in public, and then you're surprised when the public version of reality overwhelmed the private one. Graham's face tightened. I'm not surprised. I'm furious. What happened to you this morning was unconscionable, and everyone involved is being held accountable. But that doesn't mean my decision to keep our marriage private was wrong. It was wrong for me, Naya said, and she felt tears finally burning at the corners of her eyes. It was wrong that I didn't know there was this entire public narrative about you being with someone else. It was wrong that I walked into your building this morning completely unprepared for people to question my relationship to you. It was wrong that you made a unilateral decision to keep me separate from half your life without ever asking if that's what I wanted. What did you want? Graham asked, and there was genuine confusion in his voice, like this angle hadn't occurred to him. You never said you wanted to be more involved with Ridgewell. You have your own career, your own projects. I thought you appreciated having space to be Nia Hart, not just Graham Reese's wife. I do appreciate that, Nia said, but there's a difference between having my own identity and being erased from yours. I thought we were partners. I thought for better or worse meant you included me in the complicated parts of your life, not just the easy ones. But instead, you built this wall down the middle. Private Graham, who comes home to me, and public Graham, who apparently might be married to some media heiress and whose staff has no idea I exist. That's not fair, Graham said, his own frustration finally breaking through. I come home to you every night. I chose you. I married you. I built a life with you that's more real than any business deal or public relationship could ever be. The fact that I didn't parade you in front of cameras or introduce you to every employee in a 12-story building doesn't mean you were erased. It means I valued our privacy, our intimacy, the parts of my life that aren't performed for an audience. But your life is performed for an audience, Nia countered. Wow. That's what happens when you're a public figure running a major corporation. People pay attention. Media covers you. And when they're covering a false version of your life, and you do nothing to correct it because you're too busy protecting your privacy, you leave people like me vulnerable to exactly what happened this morning. Graham shook his head. What happened this morning happened because 3 employees decided to abuse their power and treat someone with contempt based on assumptions and prejudice. That's not about my PR strategy. That's about their character. It's about both, Naya insisted. Yes, they're responsible for their actions. Yes, their behavior was inexcusable, regardless of the confusion about Victoria Ashford. But their behavior was enabled by the information vacuum you created. If your staff knew you were married, if there were photos of us together, if I'd been to company events, if your assistant had my name in her contacts, none of this happens. The confusion about my identity only existed because you made me invisible. The accusation hung between them, sharp and undeniable. Graham looked at her for a long moment, and Nia watched him wrestle with it, wanting to defend his choices, wanting to maintain that he'd done everything for good reasons, but unable to fully escape the logic of her argument. I was trying to protect you, he said finally, his voice softer now, from exactly the kind of scrutiny and pressure that comes with being connected to someone like me. I watched my mother deal with it for years after my father died. The constant attention, the way every move she made was analyzed and criticized, the way she couldn't go to lunch without it ending up in some gossip column. I didn't want that for you. I didn't want our marriage to become a commodity, something people felt entitled to comment on and dissect and use for clicks and ratings. I understand that instinct, Nia said. I even appreciate it. But Graham, you can't protect me from reality by pretending I don't exist. You can't shield me from scrutiny by making me a secret. All that does is create a different kind of vulnerability, one where I can be dismissed and disrespected because no one knows I have any connection to you at all. So what do you want me to do? Graham asked, and he sounded genuinely at a loss. Hold a press conference? Issue a public statement about our marriage? Start bringing you to board meetings and investor presentations? Tell me what would make this right. I want you to acknowledge that your approach was flawed, Naya said. I want you to admit that keeping me hidden, even with good intentions, was a mistake that contributed to what happened today. And I want you to understand that moving forward, we need to make decisions about our public life together, not just you deciding unilaterally what's best for both of us. Graham was quiet for a long moment, staring past her at the city beyond the windows. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that suggested he was really hearing her, really processing what she was saying instead of just defending his position. "You're right," he said. "About most of it. Maybe all of it. I made choices that felt protective but were actually isolating. I prioritized my comfort with privacy over your need to be acknowledged. And I let a false narrative persist because I was arrogant enough to think it didn't matter, that the truth of our relationship was enough regardless of what the public believed." "And?" Naya prompted because she could hear there was more. "And I'm sorry," Graham said, meeting her eyes directly. "I'm sorry I put you in a position where you were vulnerable to what happened this morning. I'm sorry I didn't prepare you for the Victoria Ashford situation. I'm sorry I made you feel like a secret instead of a partner. And I'm sorry that my desire to protect you ended up hurting you instead." The apology landed in the space between them, and Naya felt some of the tension in her chest loosen slightly. Not disappear, there was still too much to process, too much damage to address, but loosen enough that she could breathe a little easier. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That helps. But an apology isn't enough by itself. Things have to actually change." "They will," Graham said with the kind of certainty that came from making a decision and committing to it fully. "Starting today, I'm going to issue a statement about our marriage. Nothing tabloid style, nothing invasive, just a clear acknowledgement that I'm married to you, have been for 8 months, and that any previous reporting about relationships with other people was inaccurate." "What about Victoria's father?" Nia asked. "What about the media empire that's been pushing the other narrative?" Graham's expression hardened. "Marcus Ashford is about to learn that there are consequences for using your media holdings to manufacture false stories about people's personal lives. I've tolerated it until now because I thought ignoring it was the mature response. But he used his lies to create a situation where my wife was humiliated and assaulted. That changes everything. I'll be contacting every publication that's run stories about Victoria and me, demanding corrections and retractions, and I'll be having a very direct conversation with Marcus about what happens if he doesn't cooperate fully." "He's not going to like that," Nia observed. "I don't care what he likes," Graham said flatly. "He wanted a marriage alliance to secure his business interests. What he's going to get instead is a very public demonstration of why it's a bad idea to manipulate people who have the resources to fight back. The merger he wanted? Dead. Any future business relationship between our companies? Dead. His reputation as someone who plays fair in negotiations? I'm going to make sure that's questioned in every boardroom and investors' meeting for the next decade." There was something almost frightening in Graham's tone. Not anger exactly, but the cold calculation of someone who'd decided to deploy power and knew exactly how to do maximum damage. Nia recognized it as the same quality that had built Ridgewell from a startup into a global force, the same ruthlessness that let him make hard decisions without flinching. It was just the first time she'd seen it directed at someone on her behalf. "What about internally?" she asked. "What about making sure this doesn't happen to someone else who walks through that lobby?" Graham's focus shifted back to her and the coldness thawed slightly. "Sharon and the HR team are already working on a complete overhaul of our reception protocols. Anyone claiming a relationship to executives gets verified through a new chain of command that doesn't rely on front desk staff making judgment calls. We're implementing mandatory training on unconscious bias, and not the performative kind where everyone sits through a video and signs a form. Real training with real consequences for people who don't take it seriously." "What kind of consequences?" Naya pressed, because she'd been through enough corporate training sessions to know they were often more about liability protection than actual change. "Tied to performance reviews and compensation," Graham said. "You don't complete the training and demonstrate meaningful engagement with the material, you don't get promoted. You exhibit behavior that suggests you haven't internalized the principles. You're put on a performance improvement plan. You actively violate the standards we set. You're terminated. We're making it clear that treating people with dignity and respect isn't optional. It's a core competency of working here." "And the people who watched today?" Naya asked. "The ones who filmed and laughed and did nothing?" Graham's jaw tightened. They're being identified. Everyone who was in that lobby during the incident is being interviewed. Anyone who recorded footage and hasn't voluntarily deleted it is going to be terminated. Anyone who stood by and watched without intervening is going to have a formal conversation about what we expect from employees when they witness wrongdoing. Being a passive bystander isn't acceptable anymore. That's going to make you unpopular, Naya said. People are going to say you're overreacting, that you're letting personal feelings drive business decisions. Let them, Graham said with a shrug. I'd rather run a company where people feel safe and respected than one where my employees think they can get away with cruelty as long as they're not the ones directly holding the cup. And if that means being unpopular or losing people who don't agree with those values, that's a price I'm willing to pay. Nia studied him, trying to read whether this was genuine commitment or reactive guilt that would fade once the immediate crisis passed. You need to mean it, she said, not just today when you're angry and I'm standing here covered in soda, but 6 months from now when the news cycle has moved on and implementing these changes is expensive and inconvenient. You need to actually commit to building a different culture, not just punishing the people who got caught this time. I know, Graham said, and I will. But Nia, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about corporate culture or policy changes. This is about the fact that I failed you. Not Dylan or Kara or anyone else. Me. I created conditions where the woman I love could be treated like a trespasser in my own building because I was too proud or too private or too naive to consider what might happen. That's on me. And I'm going to spend a long time making it right. The vulnerability in his voice cracked something open in Nia's chest. She'd been holding on to her anger and hurt like armor, using it to keep distance between them while she processed everything. But hearing him actually take responsibility, not deflecting to his employees' actions or defending his intentions, but genuinely acknowledging his role in what happened, made it harder to maintain that distance. I need time, she said finally, to process all of this. The assault, the lies about Victoria, the realization that you've been keeping me separate from huge parts of your life. I can't just accept your apology and move on like nothing happened. I'm not asking you to, Graham said. Take whatever time you need. We can go back to the house and you can rest, or we can go somewhere else if you don't want to be home right now. Whatever you need. Nia shook her head. I don't want to go home. Not yet. I want to see the HR investigation. I want to sit in on the interviews with Dylan and Kara and Calvin. I want to be part of the process that determines what happens next, because what happened today happened to me, and I deserve to have a voice in the response. Graham looked surprised, like this wasn't what he'd expected her to ask for. That's unusual. Most people wouldn't want to. Most people weren't assaulted in your lobby, Nia interrupted. Most people didn't have their dignity stripped away by your employees. I did. So I want to be there when they have to answer for it. I want them to see that I'm not some woman who disappeared into the background after causing them trouble. I want them to know that I matter, that what they did to me has consequences that extend beyond whatever's comfortable or convenient for them. Graham studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, I'll tell Sharon you'll be participating in the investigation, but Naya, it's going to be hard. Listening to them justify what they did, hearing them try to minimize it or make excuses. That's not going to be easy. Nothing about today has been easy, Naya said. What's a few more hours? They left the penthouse office together, taking the private elevator back down to the executive floor where HR had commandeered a large conference room for the investigation. Sharon looked up from her laptop as they entered, surprise flickering across her face when she saw Naya. Mrs. Reese, she said, standing quickly, I wasn't expecting, that is, we're handling everything. You don't need to be present for this. I want to be, Naya said simply. If that's allowed? Sharon glanced at Graham, who gave a slight nod. It's allowed, he said. Nia has every right to participate in the investigation into what happened to her. Of course, Sharon said, though she looked uncertain. We're about to begin the interview with Dylan Crow. He's been apprised of his rights and has declined legal representation. If you're going to be present, I need to make sure you understand that you can't interfere with the questioning. You can observe, but Jessica and I need to conduct the interview according to proper protocols. I understand, Nia said, taking a seat at the conference table. Dylan was brought in 5 minutes later by Morrison, still in his front desk uniform, but looking significantly less cocky than he had that morning. His eyes widened when he saw Naya sitting at the table, and something like fear flashed across his face before he managed to school his expression into something more neutral. "Mr. Crow, please have a seat," Sharon said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "This is a formal investigation into the incident that occurred in the main lobby this morning. Everything discussed here is being recorded and may be used in determining disciplinary action. Do you understand?" "Yes," Dylan said, his voice smaller than it had been earlier. Jessica, the lawyer, opened a folder and pulled out several printed screenshots from the security footage. "Let's start with the basic facts. At approximately 9:47 this morning, you poured a beverage on Mrs. Reese, is that correct?" Dylan swallowed hard. "Yes, but we'll get to context in a moment," Jessica interrupted. "First, I need you to confirm the facts. You poured approximately 20 ounces of cherry cola on another person, correct?" "Correct," Dylan admitted. "And prior to doing so, Mrs. Reese had not touched you, threatened you, or made any aggressive moves toward you, correct?" "Correct, but she was being—" "Answer the question yes or no, please," Sharon said firmly. "Had she touched or threatened you?" "No." "Had she raised her voice or used profanity?" "No, but—" "Yes or no, Mr. Crow?" "No," Dylan said, frustration creeping into his voice. "But you're not letting me explain the context. She was claiming to be Mr. Reese's wife when everyone knows he's married to Victoria Ashford. She was clearly trying to scam her way into the building, and when we wouldn't fall for it, she got aggressive." "How did she get aggressive?" Sharon asked, her pen poised over her notepad. "Specifically," Dylan hesitated, seeming to realize the trap. She insisted on her story. She wouldn't leave when we told her to." "Insisting on her truthful identity and declining to leave a public lobby before her scheduled appointment constitutes aggression in your view?" Jessica asked. "She was making people uncomfortable," Dylan tried. "Was she?" Sharon pulled out another screenshot, this one showing the lobby at 9:46 with several other visitors sitting calmly in the waiting area. "Because the security footage shows other people in the lobby who appear quite comfortable. In fact, the only people who seem agitated in these images are you and Ms. Voss." Dylan's face flushed. "You're twisting everything. I was trying to protect the building and the company from someone who was obviously lying. That's my job." "Your job," Sharon said slowly, "is to verify appointments, not to make judgments about people's veracity based on—" She paused meaningfully. "Based on what, exactly? What made you so certain Mrs. Reese was lying?" The question hung in the air, and Nia watched Dylan struggle with it, because the honest answer, the real answer, wasn't something he could say out loud in a formal HR investigation. The honest answer was that he'd looked at a black woman in expensive clothes, claiming to be married to a white billionaire, and decided immediately that she must be lying, because that combination didn't fit his worldview, didn't match his assumptions about who belonged in which spaces. "She just seemed off," Dylan said finally, the weakness of the explanation obvious even to him. "Off," Sharon repeated. "Can you elaborate on what seemed off about her?" "I don't know. Her story didn't check out." "But you didn't actually check it," Jessica interjected. "You called Mr. Reese's office and spoke to his assistant, who confirmed she didn't have an appointment in the system. But you didn't ask to speak to Mr. Reese directly. You didn't verify with building security whether Mrs. Reese had access credentials. You didn't take any additional steps to confirm or deny her identity. You made a snap judgment and then acted on it. Is that accurate?" "I guess," Dylan muttered. "You guess? Or that's what happened?" Sharon pressed. "That's what happened," Dylan admitted. "So let's talk about what happened next," Jessica said. "After you'd decided Mrs. Reese was lying, based on incomplete verification and your own judgment, you picked up a beverage and poured it on her. Walk me through your thinking in that moment. What was your goal?" Dylan shifted in his chair. "I wanted her to leave. I wanted her to understand that she couldn't come in here and try to manipulate her way past security." "And you believe pouring a drink on her would accomplish that goal?" Sharon asked. "I thought it would, I don't know, shock her into realizing we weren't going to fall for her act." "Did it occur to you that this was assault?" Jessica asked bluntly. That intentionally pouring liquid on another person is battery, which is a crime? Dylan's face went pale. I didn't think about it like that. It was just a soda. It's not like I hit her. But you did hit her, Nia said quietly, speaking for the first time since the interview began. That liquid hit me. Your contempt hit me. Your decision that I was worth less than basic human dignity hit me. So yes, Dylan, you hit me. You just used a cup instead of your fist. Dylan couldn't look at her. I'm sorry, he mumbled. I really am. I made a mistake. You made a choice, Nia corrected. A mistake is something that happens by accident. You chose to pick up that cup. You chose to tilt it. You chose to pour it over my head while Kara laughed, and you smiled like you'd done something clever. Those were choices, not mistakes. I know I'm being fired, Dylan said, looking at Sharon now instead of Nia. Mr. Reese made that clear, but I want to say for the record that I'm not a bad person. I'm not racist or prejudiced or whatever you're probably thinking. I made a bad judgment call, and I'm sorry for it. But I don't deserve to lose my career over one bad moment. One bad moment, Sharon repeated. Mr. Crow, that one bad moment involved you physically assaulting another human being in a public space with witnesses while being recorded by security cameras. That one bad moment has exposed this company to significant legal liability. That one bad moment demonstrated judgment so poor that it calls into question your fitness for any position of responsibility. So while I understand you don't feel you deserve termination, the company disagrees. Your employment here is ended, effective immediately. You'll receive your final paycheck and information about COBRA coverage within the legally required time frame. Do you have any questions? Dylan shook his head mutely, looking like he might cry. Then this interview is concluded, Sharon said. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. As Morrison led Dylan from the conference room, Nia felt a strange emptiness where she'd expected satisfaction to be. Watching him face consequences should have felt like justice, but instead it just felt hollow, because his termination didn't undo what had happened, didn't restore the dignity he'd stripped away, didn't erase the memory of standing in that lobby, drenched and helpless while people laughed. Are you okay? Graham asked quietly as the door closed behind Dylan. No, Nia said honestly, but I will be. Eventually. After we finish this. The interview with Kara Voss was next, and it followed a similar pattern. Jessica and Sharon methodically documenting every action, every decision, every choice that had contributed to the incident. Kara cried through most of it, insisting she'd never meant any harm, that she'd just been following Dylan's lead, that she'd thought they were protecting the company. But when pressed on specifics, on why she'd laughed, why she'd refused Nia access to a restroom, why she'd labeled her unstable and erratic, her justifications crumbled into exactly what they were, post hoc rationalizations for cruelty that had felt good in the moment. By the time they finished with Calvin's interview, which revealed a pattern of similar incidents he'd dismissed or minimized over the years, always siding with his staff over visitors or lower-level employees who complained, Nia was exhausted. Not just physically, though the adrenaline crash was making her limbs feel heavy and her head ache. Emotionally, spiritually. The kind of exhaustion that came from witnessing people repeatedly refuse to take real responsibility for their actions, instead parsing language and deflecting blame and trying to minimize the harm they'd caused. That's everything for today, Sharon said, closing her laptop. We'll compile the full report and recommendations by end of week, but the terminations and suspension are already in effect. Mr. Reese, we'll need to discuss how you want to communicate this to the broader organization. All hands meeting tomorrow, Graham said. I want everyone to hear directly from me about what happened and what we're doing differently moving forward. No spin, no PR softening, just the truth. Sharon nodded, though Nia could see concern in her expression. That's going to be difficult. People are going to have questions. There might be pushback from employees who think the response is too harsh. Then we'll address that pushback directly, Graham said. Anyone who thinks assault and discrimination deserve less severe consequences can take it up with me personally. After Sharon and Jessica left, Graham and Nia sat in the empty conference room, neither quite ready to move yet. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, catching dust motes and golden beams, making everything look softer than it felt. I meant what I said earlier, Graham said after a while. About changing things. About making this right. I know you need time to trust that, and I understand. But I want you to know I'm committed to it. To all of it. I believe you mean it right now, Naya said carefully. I just hope you still mean it in 6 months, in a year, when the immediate crisis has passed and holding people accountable gets inconvenient or expensive. I will, Graham promised, and you can hold me to it. In fact, I want you to. Be part of the process. Help oversee the culture changes. Make sure I'm not just talking about values, but actually implementing them. Nia looked at him, really looked at him, searching his face for signs of performance or manipulation, for the polished CEO mask that knew exactly which words would placate and which promises would satisfy. But what she saw instead was just Graham. Flawed, privileged, sometimes oblivious Graham, who genuinely loved her and was genuinely horrified by what his choices had enabled. It didn't erase the hurt, didn't fix everything that was broken, but it was something. A foundation they could maybe build on if they were both willing to do the work. Okay, she said finally. I'll help, but on one condition. Anything. You introduce me to your entire executive team, Naya said. Properly. Not as my wife, like that explains everything, but as Naya Hart-Reese, with my own credentials and my own expertise and my own identity. I want them to know me as a person, not just as your spouse. Graham smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him since this morning. Deal, and for the record, I should have done that months ago. You're brilliant and accomplished, and you deserve to be recognized in your own right, not hidden away like some secret I was ashamed of. You weren't ashamed, Naya said. You were scared. Of the attention, of the scrutiny, of what happens when you let people see the parts of your life that matter most. I understand that fear. But Graham, you can't let it control you, not if you want a real partnership, not if you want us to work. I know, Graham said quietly, and I'm done letting it control me. From here on out, we face everything together. The attention, the scrutiny, the complications, all of it, as partners. Nia reached across the table and took his hand, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers, the familiar calluses from weekend woodworking projects he used to decompress from running a tech empire. As partners, she agreed. But that means you don't get to make unilateral decisions anymore about what I can handle or what I need to be protected from. You trust me to be an adult who can decide for herself what risks she's willing to take. I trust you, Graham said, and I'm sorry I didn't show that before. They sat there in the quiet conference room as shadows lengthened and the building around them settled into evening mode, holding hands across a table covered in investigation notes and legal documents, beginning the slow work of rebuilding trust that never should have been fractured in the first place. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock the next morning, which gave Graham exactly 18 hours to decide how much truth he was willing to speak in front of 300 employees. Nia watched him pace their bedroom that night, still wearing the dress shirt from the day before, wrinkled now, collar loosened, sleeves rolled to his elbows, while he rehearsed different versions of the same message. Each iteration revealed something about what he was wrestling with, how to acknowledge systemic failures without demoralizing the entire workforce, how to hold individuals accountable without making it seem like everyone was under suspicion, how to promise meaningful change without sounding like every other CEO who'd ever stood at a podium and talked about values after a crisis. You're overthinking it, Nia said finally, setting down the book she'd been pretending to read. People don't need a perfectly crafted message. They need honesty. They need to understand what happened and why it matters, and what's going to be different now. Graham stopped pacing and looked at her. What if they don't care? What if half the room thinks I'm overreacting because nobody died, because it was just a cup of soda, because Dylan and Kara are the ones suffering consequences while the real victim is a billionaire's wife who'll be fine? Then those people reveal themselves as part of the problem, Nia said. And you deal with that too. But Graham, you can't control how everyone receives this. You can only control what you say and whether you mean it. So stop trying to find the version that makes everyone comfortable and just tell the truth. He sat down on the edge of the bed, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. The truth is, I'm terrified of getting this wrong, of saying something that makes it worse, of implementing changes that look good on paper but don't actually protect people, of being another privileged person who thinks they understand systemic problems because they've read the right books and hired the right consultants, but who doesn't actually know what it feels like to be on the receiving end of what happened to you. You're right, Nia said gently. You don't know what it feels like. And you can't know because your race and your gender and your wealth insulate you from most of the ways that power gets abused in places like your lobby. But that doesn't mean you can't do anything. It just means you have to listen to people who do have that experience and actually implement what they tell you, even when it's uncomfortable or expensive or politically complicated. Will you help me? Graham asked. Not just with the speech tomorrow, but with all of it. The policy changes, the training programs, the accountability structures. I need someone who'll tell me when I'm getting it wrong, who'll push back when I'm taking the easy route, who'll make sure this doesn't turn into just another corporate initiative that gets quietly shelved when the media attention fades. Nia considered the request carefully. Part of her wanted to say no, wanted to maintain distance from Ridgewell and its problems, wanted to protect herself from being responsible for fixing things she hadn't broken. But another part of her recognized the opportunity here, not just to prevent what happened to her from happening to others, but to actually build something better, to take the power that came with being Graham Reese's wife, power she hadn't asked for but undeniably had, and leverage it toward meaningful change. I'll help, she said finally, but not as your wife supervising your company's diversity initiative. As a consultant, with a formal contract, compensation, and actual authority to implement recommendations even when they make people uncomfortable. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. Graham's face split into the first genuine smile she'd seen since before the incident. Deal. I'll have legal draw up a consulting agreement tomorrow. Fair market rate for someone with your expertise. Independent authority to make recommendations. Direct reporting line to me and the board. Whatever you need. I'll need a team, Nia said, her mind already working through what real change would require. People with actual expertise in organizational culture, implicit bias, workplace dignity, not the usual corporate training firms that recycle the same PowerPoints. Real researchers, real practitioners, people who've done this work in meaningful ways. You'll have it, Graham promised. Budget isn't a constraint. Results are the constraint. I want to build something that actually works, not something that looks good in our annual report. They stayed up until past midnight, Nia helping Graham craft a speech that balanced accountability with hope, that named the problem clearly without drowning in corporate jargon, that made concrete commitments without promising transformation that would take years to achieve. By the time they finally turned off the lights, Graham had something that felt true. Uncomfortable in the way that honesty usually is, but true. The next morning, Nia stood at the back of Ridgewell's largest conference room while 300 employees filed in with the wary expressions of people who knew something significant had happened but weren't sure what it meant for them. She'd chosen her clothes carefully, a navy blazer over a white silk shell, tailored trousers, minimal jewelry. Professional, but not flashy. Present, but not performative. She wanted to be visible without becoming the story. Graham stood at the front of the room, and Nia watched him transform into the version of himself that could command this kind of space. Shoulders back, voice steady, presence that made people lean forward and listen. But there was something different this time. A rawness that usually got polished away before he stepped in front of an audience. Thank you all for being here, he began. I know many of you have heard rumors about an incident in our main lobby yesterday morning. I'm here to tell you exactly what happened, why it happened, and what we're going to do to make sure it never happens again. The room was utterly silent. People had their phones out, some taking notes, some probably recording despite the policy against it. Graham didn't acknowledge them. He just kept going, his voice even but carrying an undercurrent of controlled anger that made people sit up straighter. Yesterday, at approximately 9:45 a.m., my wife entered our building through the main lobby for a scheduled appointment with me. She approached the reception desk, gave her name, and explained she was here to meet me. Instead of verifying her identity through proper protocols, 3 front desk staff decided, based entirely on their own assumptions and prejudices, that she was lying. They interrogated her, they mocked her, they questioned her right to be in our building, and then one of them poured an entire cup of soda over her head, while another laughed and a third stood by and did nothing to stop it. The silence in the room shifted, became heavier, charged with shock and discomfort. Nia watched people's faces change as they processed what Graham was describing. Some looked genuinely horrified, others skeptical, like they were waiting for the other shoe to drop. A few looked defensive, arms crossed, expressions closed. "My wife's name is Nia Hart," Graham continued, and Nia felt every eye in the room turn toward her, suddenly visible in a way she hadn't been seconds before. "We've been married for 8 months. She is a brilliant professional with her own career and accomplishments that have nothing to do with me. And yesterday, in the building I own, she was treated like a criminal because employees I hired decided she didn't look like someone who could possibly belong here." He paused, letting that sink in, then pressed forward. "I want to be very clear about something. This wasn't just a customer service failure. This wasn't just one bad employee having a bad day. This was assault. This was discrimination. And this was enabled by a culture where people felt comfortable making snap judgments about other human beings based on appearance, based on assumptions, based on prejudices they probably don't even recognize in themselves." Someone in the middle of the room raised a hand, a young man Nia didn't recognize. Graham acknowledged him with a nod. "Sir, with respect, how do we know this isn't being blown out of proportion? I mean, mistakes happen. People get confused. Was it really necessary to fire 2 people and suspend another over what sounds like a communication breakdown?" Graham's expression didn't change, but Nia saw his jaw tighten. "Would you like to watch the security footage?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Because we have 14 minutes of high-definition video showing exactly what happened. We can play it right now if you think this is being exaggerated." The young man's face flushed. "I'm just saying, maybe there were misunderstandings on both sides." "There were no misunderstandings," Graham cut him off. "There was one person trying to attend a scheduled meeting and 3 people deciding she had no right to be there. There was one person asking for basic dignity and multiple people denying it to her. There was one person getting assaulted and a crowd of people treating it like entertainment. So no, this is not a both sides situation. And if you think it is, I invite you to examine why your first instinct is to defend the people who abused their power rather than the person who was harmed." The room was uncomfortable now, people shifting in their seats. But Graham wasn't done. "The people directly responsible have been terminated or suspended. But I want everyone in this room to understand that this problem is bigger than 3 individuals. This is about a culture we've built, or failed to build, where people felt comfortable acting that way in the first place, where bystanders watched and did nothing, where someone being humiliated in our lobby was treated as a spectacle rather than a crisis requiring intervention." A woman near the front spoke up, her voice tentative. "What do you want us to do differently? I mean, practically speaking, how do we prevent this from happening again?" Graham looked at her with something like relief. Finally, someone asking the right question. "That's exactly what we're going to figure out together. Starting today, we're implementing a complete overhaul of how we handle access, verification, and visitor interaction. We're bringing in external experts to help us examine our culture and identify blind spots we can't see from inside. We're creating new accountability structures so that people who witness problems have clear channels to report them and confidence that those reports will be taken seriously." He glanced back at Nia, a silent question. "Are you ready?" She gave a small nod. "My wife has agreed to lead this effort as an outside consultant," Graham said. "She'll be working with a team of experts to develop and implement changes across the organization. She has my full support and the board's full support to make recommendations and implement policies, even when they're uncomfortable or inconvenient. Her authority in this area is absolute. If she tells you something needs to change, it changes. If she identifies a problem, you address it. If you don't like that arrangement, we can discuss your departure package." Nia watched people process this, saw the calculations happening behind their eyes as they tried to figure out what this meant for them, whether this was real or performative, whether they needed to actually care or could just wait for the storm to pass. She knew most of them would wait, would hedge their bets, would do the minimum required until they could assess whether Graham and Nia actually meant what they were saying. That was fine. She'd expected resistance. What mattered was building structures that worked regardless of whether everyone was on board, that created consequences for bad behavior, even when leadership attention moved elsewhere, that protected vulnerable people even when it was inconvenient for powerful ones. Graham opened the floor for more questions, and they came rapid fire. What about people who'd been in the lobby but hadn't done anything wrong? Were they in trouble? What constituted witnessing versus just being present? How would the new training work? Would it be mandatory for everyone or just customer-facing staff? What if people disagreed with the policies being implemented? To his credit, Graham answered each question directly. Yes, everyone who'd been present was being interviewed to understand what they saw and how they responded. No, simply being in the lobby during the incident wasn't a fireable offense, but filming it or laughing at it, or refusing to help when help was needed, those had consequences. Yes, the training would be mandatory for everyone, no exceptions. And if people disagreed with policies designed to ensure basic human dignity in the workplace, they were welcome to find employment elsewhere. The meeting lasted 90 minutes, and by the end, Nia could feel the emotional exhaustion radiating off Graham. Public vulnerability wasn't his natural mode. He was much more comfortable with the polished version of leadership that acknowledged problems while maintaining careful distance from them. But today he'd shown up raw, angry, personally invested in a way that made people uncomfortable precisely because it was so uncomfortably real. As the room emptied, a few people approached Nia directly. The woman who'd asked about practical changes introduced herself as Sarah Chen, a product manager who'd been at Ridgewell for 5 years. I just want you to know that what happened to you, it's not the first time, she said quietly. There's been a pattern of front desk staff treating certain visitors differently. I've reported it before, but nothing really changed. Maybe now it will. It will, Nia promised. Tell me more. Everything you've seen, everything you've reported, everyone who's had similar experiences. I need to understand the full scope of the problem. Sarah nodded, relief evident on her face. I'll send you an email with details. Thank you for doing this, for not just accepting an apology and moving on. A lot of people would have. After Sarah left, Marcus approached, the young receptionist who'd been suspended for not doing more to stop the incident. He looked like he hadn't slept, dark circles under his eyes, hands shaking slightly as he held a folder. Mrs. Reese, I know I'm suspended and I'm not supposed to be here, but I needed to give you this, he said, offering the folder. It's documentation of other incidents I witnessed or heard about over the past year. Times when Dylan or Kara treated people badly, times when supervisors ignored complaints, times when I tried to speak up and got told to mind my own business. I should have done more, should have escalated harder. But I was scared of losing my job, scared of being labeled a troublemaker, scared of... His voice cracked slightly. Scared of exactly what happened, which was that nobody would listen anyway. Nia took the folder, scanning the contents quickly. Dates, names, descriptions of incidents ranging from microaggressions to outright hostility. A pattern of behavior that had been documented but never meaningfully addressed. This is incredibly valuable, she told Marcus. This is exactly what we need to understand how deep the problems go. Thank you for compiling it. I'm not trying to save my job, Marcus said quickly. If the suspension stands, I understand. I failed you when it mattered, but I wanted you to have this so that maybe the changes you make will actually stick, so that the next person who speaks up won't be ignored like I was. The suspension stands, Nia said gently. Not because you're a bad person, but because there have to be consequences for inaction when action is required. But Marcus, when you come back, I want you on my team. I want people who've seen the problems firsthand, who understand what it costs to speak up, who are willing to do the uncomfortable work of building something better. If you're interested. Marcus's eyes widened. Yes, absolutely, thank you. After he left, Graham appeared at Nia's side, exhaustion evident in the set of his shoulders. How are you holding up? He asked. I'm okay, Nia said, and she was surprised to find it was mostly true. Yesterday's violation still ached like a bruise that hadn't finished forming, but being here, standing in the building where it happened, claiming space instead of being dismissed from it, felt like reclaiming something essential. People are already coming forward with other incidents. This goes deeper than just Dylan and Kara. I was afraid of that, Graham admitted. How bad is it? Bad enough that we've got months of work ahead of us, Nia said, but not so bad that it's unfixable. We just have to actually commit to fixing it. They spent the rest of the day in meetings, with HR to discuss investigation findings, with legal to review policy changes, with communications to draft the public statement Graham had promised about their marriage, and the false Victoria Ashford narrative. That statement went out at 4 p.m., carefully worded to correct the record without being tabloid fodder. Graham Reese had been married to Nia Hart for 8 months. Previous reporting about other relationships was inaccurate, and based on deliberate misinformation, the couple valued their privacy and requested respect for their personal life. Within an hour, Graham's phone was flooded with calls from business journalists, media outlets, and most aggressively, Marcus Ashford himself. "Don't answer it," Nia said when Graham's phone lit up with Ashford's name for the 5th time. "Whatever he wants to say, it can wait until you're ready to hear it." But Graham shook his head. "No, part of fixing this is dealing with the people who created the problem in the first place. Ashford used his media empire to manufacture a false story about my personal life, and that story contributed directly to what happened to you. He needs to understand there are consequences for that." He answered the call on speaker, and Marcus Ashford's voice boomed through. Patrician, entitled, the voice of someone used to getting his way. "Graham, what the hell is this statement about? You're married? To someone I've never even heard of? This is going to completely undermine the narrative we've been building." "The narrative you've been building," Graham interrupted, his voice ice cold. "I never authorized any story about Victoria and me. I never gave you permission to use my name in your media empire's speculation. And I certainly never agreed to a marriage alliance that existed only in your imagination and your newspapers." "Don't be naive," Ashford shot back. "This is how deals get done at our level. You create the public expectation, you let it build momentum, and eventually reality aligns with perception. It's worked for generations of powerful families. Your problem is you got cold feet and married some—" He paused, clearly searching for a word that wouldn't be overtly offensive but still carried his meaning. "Some woman with no connections, no family backing, no strategic value to either of our companies." Nia felt rage spike hot and immediate, but Graham's hand found hers, steady, grounding. "Marcus, let me be very clear. The merger you wanted? It's dead. Any future business relationship between Ridgewell and Ashford Media? Dead. And if you don't issue immediate corrections to every publication you control that's run stories about Victoria and me, I will sue you personally and corporately for defamation. And I will make sure every detail of your media manipulation becomes part of the public record. Do you understand?" "You can't be serious," Ashford said, but there was uncertainty creeping into his bluster now. "Over some marriage announcement? Graham, be reasonable. We can spin this. Say the relationship with Victoria didn't work out. Say you've moved on. Say nothing," Graham cut him off. "You had your chance to control this narrative. You used it to lie about me, to manufacture a relationship that never existed, and to create confusion that directly harmed my wife. So now I'm controlling the narrative. You'll issue corrections, you'll stop any future speculation about my personal life, and you'll consider yourself fortunate that I'm not pursuing more aggressive legal action. Those are the terms, non-negotiable." "I could destroy you in the media," Ashford threatened. "Every outlet I own, every journalist I have relationships with. I could make your life very uncomfortable, Graham." "You could try," Graham agreed. "But unlike you, I don't need media favor to succeed. My company's value is based on actual innovation and actual products, not on puff pieces and strategic coverage. So go ahead. Use your media empire to come after me. I'll welcome the scrutiny. In fact, I'll fund investigative journalism into exactly how you use your outlets to manipulate coverage for personal gain. I think that could be a very interesting series of stories." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Nia thought Ashford might have hung up. Then his voice came back, stripped of its earlier confidence. "You'll regret this. The merger would have been good for both companies. Good for the industry." "Maybe," Graham said, "but it would have required me to sacrifice my integrity and my marriage to get it. That's not a trade I'm willing to make. Goodbye, Marcus. I'll expect those corrections by end of week." He ended the call and set his phone down with deliberate care, like it might explode if handled roughly. Then he looked at Nia with an expression that mixed triumph with exhaustion. "That felt good," he admitted. "Probably more than it should have, but it felt good." It felt necessary, Naya corrected. He needed to understand that manipulating media narratives has real consequences, that he can't just manufacture stories about people's lives and expect no pushback. He's not going to let this go quietly, Graham warned. He'll find ways to make things difficult. Pressure board members, influence investors, use his media connections to create problems for Ridgewell. Then we deal with those problems when they come, Naya said, but we don't back down because someone threatens us. That's exactly the kind of cowardice that lets people like Ashford keep abusing power. Someone has to stand up to him, even when it's costly. Graham pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. Have I mentioned that you're much braver than I am? You're plenty brave, Naya said. You just needed a reason to stop hiding behind politeness and propriety. Turns out watching your wife get assaulted is a pretty good reason. They stayed in the office late that night, working through the initial framework for the culture change initiative. Nia mapped out phases, immediate policy changes that could be implemented within weeks, medium-term structural reforms that would take months, and long-term cultural shifts that would require years of sustained effort. Graham contributed his knowledge of organizational dynamics, helping Nia understand where resistance would be strongest and how to navigate the political realities of implementing change in a large corporation. By midnight, they had a plan that felt both ambitious and achievable, assuming they could maintain commitment and resources through the inevitable obstacles and setbacks. This is going to be hard, Graham said, looking at the whiteboard they'd covered with diagrams and timelines and interconnected challenges. People are going to push back. They're going to say we're overreacting, that we're creating a hostile environment for longtime employees, that we're prioritizing political correctness over business results. Let them, Nia said. Every meaningful change faces resistance from people invested in the status quo. The question isn't whether there will be pushback. The question is whether we're willing to hold firm when it comes. I am, Graham said, as long as you're doing this with me. I don't think I can do it alone. You're not alone, Nia assured him. And you won't be. We're building a team. We're creating systems. We're distributing the work across enough people that it doesn't depend on any one person's commitment staying strong. That's how you make change that lasts. You make it structural, not personal. They drove home in comfortable silence, exhaustion settling over both of them like a heavy blanket. The house was dark when they arrived, just the automated lights clicking on as they moved through rooms that felt simultaneously familiar and strange, because everything was different now, even the spaces that looked the same. They'd crossed some threshold yesterday morning in that lobby, stepped through into a version of their marriage that was more honest and more complicated and somehow more real than what had come before. As Nia finally peeled off her cola-stained coat, the one she'd insisted on keeping as evidence, as reminder, as symbol of what she wouldn't let be erased, she felt Graham's arms come around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. I love you, he said quietly, and I'm sorry for all of it, for not protecting you better, for not introducing you to my world in a way that honored who you are, for letting false narratives persist because I thought they didn't matter. I'm sorry. I know, Nia said, turning in his arms to face him. And I love you too. Even when I'm angry with you, even when you've screwed up spectacularly, even when you've got months of work ahead to earn back the trust you damaged, I still love you. That's more than I deserve, Graham said. Probably, Nia agreed with a small smile. But love isn't really about deserving. It's about choosing. And I choose you. I choose us. I choose the messy, complicated work of building something real together instead of the polished fiction we were living before. They stood there in their darkened bedroom, holding each other while the city lights glittered beyond the windows like promises or warnings or both. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more resistance to change, more people invested in maintaining systems that benefited them, more obstacles to overcome. But tonight, they were just two people who'd been forced to see each other clearly and had decided that what they saw was worth fighting for. That was enough. For now, it was enough. 6 months later, Naya walked through the same glass doors where she'd been humiliated, but the lobby felt different now, not in its physical structure, which remained marble and light and architectural ambition, but in the energy that moved through it. The reception desk had been redesigned, lowered slightly so that staff and visitors met at eye level rather than staff looking down from an elevated position of authority. The team behind it had turned over completely, not through mass terminations, but through careful hiring that prioritized emotional intelligence alongside administrative competence. The young woman who greeted her, Jasmine, 25, with warm brown eyes and a genuine smile, looked up from her computer and said, "Good morning, Mrs. Reese. Mr. Chen is expecting you for the 9 o'clock meeting. Can I get you anything while you're here?" No interrogation, no suspicion, just basic human courtesy extended without calculation or judgment. "I'm good. Thank you, Jasmine," Naya said, and she meant it. She took the elevator up to the 3rd floor where the culture transformation team had claimed a suite of offices that buzzed with purposeful energy. Marcus was already there, reviewing presentation slides for the board meeting scheduled for that afternoon. He'd been back from his suspension for 5 months now, working as Nia's deputy director with the kind of intensity that came from someone determined to make amends through action rather than words. "Morning," he said, looking up with the slightly harried expression of someone managing too many moving parts simultaneously. "We've got the quarterly metrics compiled. The numbers are actually pretty encouraging, though there are a few areas where we're still seeing resistance." Nia settled into the chair across from his desk, accepting the tablet he handed her with graphs and data points that told the story of institutional change in charts and percentages. Reported incidents of discriminatory behavior were down 42% from the baseline they'd established. Employee satisfaction scores around workplace dignity were up 37%. Turnover among staff from historically marginalized groups had decreased by 28%. Anonymous reporting system usage was up 300%, which sounded alarming until you understood it meant people finally trusted there would be consequences for bad behavior rather than consequences for reporting it. "The resistance areas are mostly middle management," Marcus explained, pulling up another set of data. "People who've been here long enough to have established ways of operating, but not senior enough to have been part of the executive conversations about why this matters. They're complying with the letter of the policies, but not the spirit, going through the training, but not changing actual behavior." "Expected," Nia said, making notes on the tablet. "That's why we built in the 6-month review cycle. Time to start identifying who's genuinely trying to grow versus who's just performing compliance. The ones who are performing, they get flagged for additional coaching. If they still don't shift after coaching, they get managed out." "That's going to make you unpopular," Marcus warned. "The executive team is already getting pushback from some of the board members about the cost of this initiative. If we start pushing people out who aren't technically violating policies, then we deal with that pushback," Nia said firmly. "This was never going to be universally popular. Change never is. The question is whether the board and the executive team are willing to stand behind the commitment they made, or whether they're going to cave the first time it gets expensive or uncomfortable." As if summoned by the conversation, Graham appeared in the doorway, dressed for the board meeting in a charcoal suit that somehow made him look both authoritative and approachable. "Ready for this afternoon?" he asked Nia. "Ready as I'll ever be," she said, "though I'm not naive enough to think everyone in that room is going to love what we're presenting." "They don't have to love it," Graham said. "They just have to fund it and support it. And if they won't, I've already drafted my speech about why I'll be seeking new board members who actually share the company's stated values." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "You'd really replace board members over this?" "I'd replace anyone over this," Graham said flatly. "Board members, executives, longtime employees, doesn't matter. What happened to Naya 6 months ago revealed rot that goes deeper than 3 individuals. If people aren't willing to do the work of cutting that rot out, they don't belong in positions of power here. That includes the board." It was the kind of statement that would have seemed performative 6 months ago, when Graham was still learning how to translate his anger and guilt into sustained action. But Nia had watched him show up consistently through every difficult conversation, every uncomfortable policy implementation, every moment when backing down would have been easier than pushing forward. He'd meant what he said that night in their bedroom. He'd chosen the messy, complicated work. And he'd kept choosing it even when the immediate crisis faded and other priorities competed for attention. The board meeting started at 2 o'clock in the penthouse conference room with windows overlooking the city, and a tension that made the expensive air conditioning work harder than usual. 8 board members sat around the mahogany table. 6 men, 2 women, all of them wealthy and powerful, and used to their opinions carrying weight. Nia recognized the dynamics immediately. 3 were genuinely supportive of the culture initiative. 2 were openly skeptical, and 3 were hedging their bets, waiting to see which way the wind blew before committing. Graham opened with the quarterly business results: revenue up, user growth strong, new product launches exceeding projections. He established credibility through numbers, reminding everyone that Ridgewell's core business remained healthy despite, or perhaps because of, the cultural changes they'd been implementing. Then he turned the presentation over to Nia. 6 months ago, something happened in our lobby that should never have happened anywhere, she began, her voice steady, despite the flutter of nerves in her chest. I was assaulted and humiliated by employees who decided within 60 seconds that I didn't belong in this building. That incident prompted an investigation that revealed systemic problems with how we treat visitors, how we handle complaints, and how we exercise power in ways that disproportionately harm people from marginalized communities. She advanced the presentation to show the data Marcus had compiled, the baseline measurements, the interventions they'd implemented, the changes they were seeing. We've made significant progress in 6 months. Reported incidents are down substantially. Employee satisfaction is up. Turnover among diverse staff is decreasing. Our anonymous reporting system is finally being used the way it was intended, which means people trust that reports will be taken seriously rather than punished. One of the skeptical board members, Richard Chen, no relation to Marcus, a venture capitalist who'd been on the board since Ridgewell's Series B, raised his hand. These numbers are fine, but what's this costing us? I'm seeing budget allocations for consulting, training, additional HR staff, technology for the reporting system. We're spending millions on what amounts to sensitivity training. How do we know this is actually moving the needle on business outcomes, rather than just making us feel good about ourselves? Nia had expected this question, had prepared for it. The direct costs are approximately $3.2 million annually, she said, which represents less than 1% of our operating budget. The indirect benefits are harder to quantify but include reduced legal liability from discrimination claims, improved retention of high-performing, diverse employees who previously left because of hostile culture, an enhanced reputation that makes us more attractive to both customers and talent in an increasingly values-conscious market. But can you prove causation? Richard pressed. Can you definitively say that these changes are responsible for the business improvements rather than just correlation that would have happened anyway? Can you definitively prove that any HR initiative causes specific business outcomes? Nia countered. Can you prove with absolute certainty that your health insurance benefits retain employees, or is it possible they'd stay anyway? Can you prove your leadership development programs create better managers, or is it possible those people would have grown into their roles regardless? We make investments in organizational health because we believe they matter, not because we can run controlled experiments that isolate single variables. The question isn't whether I can prove this with scientific certainty. The question is whether you believe workplace dignity is a core value worth investing in, even when the ROI is partially intangible. Richard sat back, not entirely satisfied, but without an immediate rebuttal. Another board member, Melissa Torres, former CEO of a major consumer brand and one of the genuinely supportive voices, spoke up. I think what Nia is doing here is exactly the kind of leadership we should be encouraging. Yes, there are costs, but there are also costs to doing nothing. Legal costs, reputation costs, the cost of losing talented people who won't tolerate discriminatory environments. I'd rather spend money on prevention than on defending lawsuits and rebuilding our reputation after the next incident. There's also the moral argument, Graham added, which is that we should do this because it's right, not just because it's profitable. If the only reason we treat people with dignity is because it shows positive ROI, then our values are for sale to the highest bidder. That's not the company I want to run. The conversation continued for another 90 minutes, cycling through variations of the same fundamental tension. How much was the company willing to invest in cultural change? How quickly did they expect to see results? And what happened if the results didn't meet expectations? Nia answered every question, provided every data point requested, and refused to downplay either the challenges remaining or the importance of continuing the work. By the time the meeting ended, they had approval for another year of funding, commitment to expand the initiative to regional offices, an agreement that culture metrics would be included in executive performance reviews, and compensation. It wasn't everything Nia had hoped for. She'd wanted mandatory culture training tied to promotion eligibility, which got tabled for further discussion, but it was enough to keep momentum going. As board members filed out, Melissa approached Nia with a warm smile. "That was masterfully done," she said. "You handled Richard's skepticism without getting defensive. You acknowledged limitations without undermining your own work. And you made it clear this isn't going away just because it's hard. That's exactly what this company needs." "Thank you," Nia said. "Though I have to admit, 6 months ago, I never imagined I'd be standing in a boardroom defending diversity initiatives. This wasn't exactly my career plan." "The best work rarely is," Melissa said. "Sometimes we end up doing the most important things because circumstances force us into positions we didn't seek. You didn't choose to be assaulted in Graham's lobby, but you chose what to do afterward. That choice matters more than the circumstances that prompted it." After Melissa left, Graham pulled Nia aside, his hand finding hers in a gesture that had become their private anchor through 6 months of difficult conversations and harder changes. "You were incredible in there," he said quietly. "The way you handled Richard, the way you framed the moral argument without dismissing the business case, that was leadership." "I learned from watching you," Nia said. "You've been doing this dance for years, balancing what's right with what's practical, pushing for change while managing stakeholders who'd rather maintain the status quo. I'm just applying those lessons to a different domain." "You're doing more than that," Graham insisted. "You're building something that's going to outlast both of us. Culture that's embedded in systems and structures instead of dependent on individual champions. That's the kind of legacy that actually matters." They took the elevator down to the 3rd floor where the culture team was waiting to debrief the board presentation. The conference room was full, not just Marcus and the core staff Nia had hired, but representatives from HR, legal, communications, and facilities management. People who'd been skeptical 6 months ago but had gradually been won over by the combination of clear metrics and genuine commitment. "Board approved another year of funding," Nia announced, and the room erupted in relieved applause. "With expansion to regional offices and integration into executive performance reviews. We've got work ahead of us, but we've got the resources and authority to do it right." Sarah Chen, the product manager who'd approached Nia after the first all-hands meeting, raised her hand. "What about the middle management resistance Marcus mentioned? How are we handling that?" "Same way we've handled every other resistance," Nia said, "with clarity about expectations, support for people genuinely trying to grow, and consequences for people who refuse. We're implementing a 6-month checkpoint where managers get assessed not just on their technical performance, but on their culture leadership. Those who are building inclusive teams and addressing problems proactively get recognized and rewarded. Those who are creating hostile environments or ignoring issues get additional coaching, and those who still don't shift after coaching get managed out of leadership roles. That's going to cause some departures," someone from HR noted. "Good," Nia said, and she didn't soften it. "We've been too afraid of losing people who don't share our values, too worried about the disruption of turnover, too focused on preserving institutional knowledge, even when that knowledge includes toxic patterns we're trying to change. Yes, some people will leave, and we'll replace them with people who actually want to be part of building something better. That's not a bug, it's a feature." The meeting continued for another hour, drilling into specifics of the regional expansion, discussing how to adapt training for different office cultures, and troubleshooting challenges that had emerged in the first 6 months. By the time they finished, it was past 6 o'clock and the building was emptying out, people heading home to families and lives that existed beyond conference rooms and culture initiatives. Nia and Graham were among the last to leave, walking through the lobby together as evening light slanted through the glass walls and turned everything golden. Jasmine was still at the reception desk, finishing up some administrative work, and she looked up with a smile as they passed. "Have a good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Reese," she said warmly. "You too, Jasmine," Nia responded, and she felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of tension she hadn't fully realized she'd been carrying. This lobby, which had been the site of her worst humiliation, was becoming just a lobby again. A space she could move through without bracing for violence, without scanning for threats, without feeling like she had to prove her right to exist there. Outside, the Portland evening was cool and clear, the kind of autumn weather that made the city feel almost magical with its combination of changing leaves and crisp air. They walked to the parking garage, hand in hand, comfortable in the silence that came from having spent all day in intense conversation and not needing to fill every moment with more words. "I have something for you," Graham said as they reached his car. He opened the trunk and pulled out a folder. Not the sleek leather portfolio he usually carried, but something older, more worn, clearly significant. "What is this?" Naya asked, taking it carefully. "Open it," Graham said, and there was something in his voice, nervous anticipation mixed with hope. Inside the folder was a deed. Property deed for a commercial building in Portland's Pearl District. And not just any building. Nia recognized the address as a historic structure she'd mentioned months ago, when they'd been talking about her own career dreams. A building that would be perfect for the consulting firm she'd been considering starting, the one that would take the work she'd done at Ridgewell and extend it to other organizations that wanted to actually transform their cultures instead of just checking diversity boxes. "You bought me a building?" Naya said, her voice catching. "I bought us a building," Graham corrected. "For your firm. For the work you're going to do beyond Ridgewell. You've proven over the past 6 months that you're brilliant at this, at seeing systemic problems, designing interventions, and holding people accountable through the inevitable resistance. Other companies need that expertise. You shouldn't have to rent some generic office space to provide it." But Naya looked at the deed, at the address that represented possibility and independence and partnership all at once. "This is too much," she said. "Graham, this is—" "It's nowhere near enough," he interrupted. 6 months ago, you were assaulted in my building because I failed to create a culture where you'd be safe. You could have walked away, could have divorced me, sued the company, gone public with everything in ways that would have destroyed both my reputation and Ridgewell's stock price. Instead, you stayed. You fought. You built something that's making my company better and protecting people who'll never know your name because the discrimination they would have faced just doesn't happen anymore. A building is the least I can do." "A building is a lot," Naya said, but she was smiling now, tears blurring the edges of the deed as she held it. "But thank you. Really. This means I can actually do this. Build something that lasts beyond any single engagement. Create frameworks that organizations can implement even after I'm gone. Make this work sustainable instead of dependent on crisis moments that force temporary attention." "That's exactly what you should do," Graham said. "And I'll support it however I can. Funding, connections, case studies from Ridgewell, whatever you need to make this successful." They stood in the parking garage, holding each other while fluorescent lights hummed overhead and cars started and stopped around them. Two people who'd survived something that could have destroyed them and had chosen instead to let it transform them. Not into perfect people, there was no such thing, but into partners who'd learned that real love wasn't about protection or privacy or keeping uncomfortable truths at bay. It was about showing up honestly, even when honesty was painful, and doing the hard work of building something genuine instead of something polished. 3 months after that, Nia stood in the renovated building in the Pearl District, watching her team move furniture into offices that still smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. Her consulting firm, Dignity Partners, they'd named it after weeks of debate, was officially launching with 3 major clients already signed, a waiting list of organizations that wanted help with cultural transformation, and a reputation that had spread through word of mouth faster than any marketing campaign could have managed. Marcus had left Ridgewell to join her as a full partner, bringing with him the institutional knowledge they'd built together and the moral authority of someone who'd failed once and spent every day since trying to do better. Sarah Chen had come on as Director of Training Development, designing programs that went deeper than the standard corporate fare. They'd hired specialists in restorative justice, organizational psychology, and systemic change, people who understood that real transformation required more than policies and training videos. Graham appeared in the doorway of what would be Nia's office, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the shop downstairs. "This place is coming together beautifully," he said, handing her one. "How does it feel to be officially independent?" "Terrifying," Nia admitted, "and exhilarating, and right in a way I didn't know work could feel right. Like I'm finally doing what I'm supposed to be doing, even though I never planned any of this." "That's how the best things usually happen," Graham observed. "We make plans, life disrupts them, and if we're lucky, we end up somewhere better than we imagined." "You call what happened in your lobby lucky?" Nia asked, raising an eyebrow. "I call what we did afterward lucky," Graham corrected. The assault was unconscionable. The discrimination was unacceptable. But the way we responded, the way you responded, turned something terrible into something that's going to help thousands of people who'll never know the origin story. That's not luck exactly. That's choosing to build light from darkness. And that's a choice I'm grateful we made together. Nia set her coffee down and moved into his arms, fitting against him in the way they'd learned over 9 months of marriage that had contained more growth than some couples experienced in decades. I'm grateful too, she said, not for what happened, but for who we became in response to it. For the marriage we built once we stopped pretending privacy was the same as intimacy. For the work we're doing that actually matters. Speaking of work that matters, Graham said, pulling back slightly so he could look at her, I got a call from Marcus Ashford yesterday. Nia tensed. What did he want? To apologize, actually, Graham said, and he looked as surprised by this as Nia felt. Apparently, several of his media properties have been losing credibility because people started investigating how they manipulate coverage. Your existence, the fact that he'd fabricated an entire relationship between Victoria and me, became a case study in how legacy media outlets sometimes prioritize powerful families' interests over journalistic integrity. It's damaged his reputation enough that he's actually feeling consequences. He wanted me to know he's implementing new editorial standards and oversight to prevent it from happening again. Do you believe him? Nia asked. I believe he's experiencing consequences he didn't anticipate, Graham said. Whether that translates into genuine change or just better concealment of future manipulation remains to be seen. But either way, he's learned that there are limits to what even powerful people can do without accountability. That's something. That's something, Nia agreed. They spent the rest of the afternoon finishing the office setup, arranging furniture and hanging art and making the space feel like a place where important work could happen. By evening, when the last box had been unpacked and the last picture hung, they stood in the main conference room and looked at what they'd built. To new beginnings, Graham said, raising his coffee cup in a mock toast. To honest partnerships, Nia countered, clinking her cup against his. To work that matters and love that shows up even when it's hard. To all of that, Graham agreed. And to you, Nia Hart-Reese, for being braver and stronger and more committed to justice than I had any right to expect when I asked you to marry me. You got more than you bargained for, Nia said with a smile. I got exactly what I needed, Graham corrected. I just didn't know it until that morning in the lobby when I saw what my failures had cost you. Thank you for giving me the chance to do better. Thank you for actually doing better, Nia said, for not just apologizing and hoping I'd forget, for showing up day after day to do the hard work of change. That matters more than any apology ever could. 6 months after that, Nia returned to Ridgewell's lobby for a final check-in on the Culture Transformation Initiative. The annual review she'd contracted to do showed continued progress. Incident reports still declining, satisfaction scores still rising, turnover among diverse employees now lower than the company average. The policies and structures she'd implemented were working, not perfectly but meaningfully, creating an environment where people felt safer and more valued than they had before. The reception desk was staffed by people who greeted everyone with genuine warmth. The security protocols had been redesigned to prioritize dignity while maintaining safety. The anonymous reporting system was embedded enough in company culture that using it no longer felt like taking a career risk. And most importantly, there was leadership at every level that understood culture work wasn't something you did once and declared complete. It was an ongoing commitment that required constant attention and course correction. We've come a long way, Graham said as they stood in that lobby together, looking at the space that had once been a site of trauma and had become a symbol of what was possible when people chose transformation over comfort. We have, Nia agreed. But there's still work to do. There will always be work to do. That's the nature of building cultures that actually honor human dignity. It's never finished. You just keep choosing it day after day, even when it's hard. Speaking of choices, Graham said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out an envelope. I have something for you. Nia took it, curious. Inside was a single piece of paper. A check made out to her consulting firm for $250,000 with a memo line that read, Annual Culture Audit and Continued Consultation. What's this? She asked. Your retainer for next year, Graham said, and the year after that, and every year as long as you're willing to hold us accountable. Because you were right about everything. Culture change isn't something you do once and declare victory. It's an ongoing commitment that requires outside perspective to prevent backsliding. I want you to be that perspective, to be the voice that keeps us honest when it would be easier to slide back into old patterns. Nia looked at the check, at the concrete commitment it represented, and felt something in her chest expand with gratitude and hope. "This is more than consulting," she said. "This is partnership. This is you trusting me to tell you hard truths even when they're uncomfortable." "That's exactly what it is," Graham confirmed. "Because 15 months ago, you walked through these doors expecting to be welcomed, and instead you were assaulted. That happened on my watch, in my building, because of systems I failed to build and culture I failed to cultivate. I can't undo that, but I can commit to doing better. And the best way I know to ensure I actually do better is to keep you involved, keep you challenging us, keep you pushing for the changes that are always easier to postpone than to implement." Nia folded the check carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. "Then I accept. Not because I need the money. Dignity Partners is doing well enough that we can be selective about clients. But because Ridgewell matters. What you're building here matters, and I want to be part of making sure it stays on track." They walked out of the building together as afternoon light painted the glass and steel in shades of gold and amber, the kind of light that made promises about better tomorrows. And for once, Nia believed those promises, not because change was easy or complete, but because she'd seen what happened when people chose, again and again, to do the hard work of building something better than what came before. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "New client signed. Major healthcare system wanting complete culture overhaul. Can we meet tomorrow to discuss scope?" Another message from Sarah. "Training pilot at the tech startup got incredible feedback. They want to expand to all employees and bring us back quarterly. This model is working." And finally, a message from Graham, even though he was standing right beside her. "Proud of you, always. Love you more than words can say." Nia looked at her husband, at the man who'd failed her, and then spent every day since trying to make it right, who'd learned that love wasn't about protection but about partnership, who'd discovered that real change required more than good intentions. It demanded sustained commitment even when the cost was high and the rewards were uncertain. "I love you too," she said out loud, even though he already knew. "Thank you for choosing to grow with me instead of giving up when it got hard." "Thank you for believing I could grow," Graham responded, "for not giving up on me when you had every right to walk away." They drove home through familiar streets as the city settled into evening. Two people who'd survived a crisis that could have destroyed them and had instead let it reveal who they really were and who they wanted to become. The work wasn't finished, would never be fully finished, because building cultures of dignity and justice was lifelong labor, not a destination you reached and then relaxed into. But they were doing the work, together, honestly, with commitment that went deeper than any single incident or any single victory. And in the end, that was what mattered most. Not that they'd never faced injustice or never made mistakes, but that when they did, they chose to build something better from the wreckage. They chose transformation over comfort. They chose partnership over pride. They chose the hard, slow work of becoming people who could look at themselves in the mirror and know they'd done everything possible to make the world a little more just, a little more kind, a little more worthy of the people who had to live in it. That evening, as they sat on their back porch watching stars appear in the darkening sky, Nia thought about the woman she'd been 15 months ago, confident in her marriage, comfortable in her life, unaware of the systems that would judge her unworthy of basic dignity the moment she stepped into the wrong lobby. She couldn't go back to being that woman. The assault had changed her in ways that couldn't be undone. But maybe that was okay. Maybe wisdom came not from avoiding wounds, but from what you built afterward, from the choices you made with full knowledge of how badly things could go wrong. "What are you thinking about?" Graham asked, noticing her silence. "About how far we've come," Nia said. "About how much has changed in 15 months. About how I walked into your lobby that morning as one person and walked out as someone completely different." "Better or worse?" Graham asked quietly. Nia considered the question carefully. "Different," she said finally. "More aware of how power works and how it fails. Less naive about the world, but more committed to changing it. I wouldn't choose to go through that morning again. But I wouldn't undo who I've become because of it either. I understand that, Graham said. I'm not who I was 15 months ago either. I was arrogant about my own goodness, confident that my intentions were enough, blind to all the ways I was perpetuating systems I claimed to oppose. I'm still learning, still growing, but at least now I'm doing it with my eyes open. They sat in comfortable silence as night fully claimed the sky and the city lights below them twinkled like earthbound constellations. Somewhere out there, people were walking through lobbies and being seen or being dismissed, being welcomed or being questioned, being treated with dignity or being judged unworthy of it based on calculations they'd never consented to and couldn't control. And somewhere out there, other people were doing the work, the hard, unglamorous, usually invisible work of building systems that recognized everyone's humanity regardless of how they looked or where they came from, or whether they matched someone's expectations about who belonged in which spaces. Nia was one of those people now. Not by choice exactly. She would have preferred never to have been assaulted, never to have had her dignity stripped away in a public lobby while people watched and filmed and laughed. But given that it had happened, she'd chosen to let it mean something, to let it catalyze change that would protect people she'd never meet, in situations she'd never witness, from cruelty they'd never have to endure because she'd done the work of dismantling the systems that enabled it. That was legacy. That was love made tangible. That was what it meant to take something broken and build light from the shattered pieces. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.